There's an ancient teaching that says, when awareness ripens, guidance reveals itself. Today, you are invited to step into one of the deepest foundations of esoteric knowledge, the Seven Hermetic Principles, wisdom attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, the archetypal sage revered as the source of sacred science and hidden understanding. These principles are not merely philosophical ideas. Each one functions as a symbolic key, and when understood together, they merge into a single master key, one capable of unlocking the inner chambers of the universal mystery tradition. This presentation brings together 7 distinct explorations, each devoted to one Hermetic law, allowing their meaning to unfold progressively until a complete structure becomes visible. The Hermetic principles form the underlying architecture of existence itself. To study them is to gain insight into the mechanics of reality, consciousness, and creation. But to embody them is something far greater. It is to step beyond passive observation and become an active participant in shaping one's own life and perception. These laws do not stand alone. They interlock, reinforce, and illuminate one another, forming a coherent system whose sequence is intentional rather than arbitrary. Each principle prepares a mind for the next, guiding awareness through deeper layers of understanding. As you begin this journey, set aside assumptions and surface interpretations. What follows is not information meant to be consumed, but knowledge meant to be entered. Prepare yourself to descend into the inner sanctuary of Hermetic wisdom, where symbols speak, laws reveal themselves, and the architecture of reality becomes visible to those ready to see. Before form, before matter, before light itself, there was mind. The Hermetic tradition opens its teachings with a declaration so simple that it is often misunderstood, and so profound that it reshapes everything that follows. All is mind. The universe is mental. This is not poetry. It is not metaphor. It is a statement about the fundamental architecture of reality. The principle of mentalism teaches that the universe is not built from matter, but from consciousness. What we experience is solid. Physical existence is not the source of reality. It is a result of an underlying, infinite intelligence often referred to as the All. This intelligence is not separate from the universe. It is the universe, expressing itself through form. According to Hermetic wisdom, nothing exists outside this universal mind. Every star, every atom, every moment of time unfolds within it. The cosmos is not a machine that runs independently. It is a living, thinking system. Reality itself is sustained the same way a thought is sustained in the mind of the thinker. To understand mentalism is to understand that existence is closer to a dream than a mechanism. Just as a dream appears solid and real to the dreamer while it is happening, the universe appears fixed and objective while consciousness is focused within it. Yet both are mental constructions held together by awareness. Ancient civilizations across the world arrived at the same insight through different languages and symbols. In Hindu philosophy, the universe is described as a dream of Vishnu, endlessly unfolding within divine consciousness. In Buddhist teachings, reality is said to arise dependent on mind. In Egyptian and Greek Hermeticism, Hermes Trismegistus taught that all forms are born from intelligence before they manifest as matter. What makes the Hermetic view unique is its clarity. Mind is not a byproduct of matter. Matter is a byproduct of mind. This principle immediately challenges the modern materialistic worldview, which claims that consciousness emerges from the brain. Hermeticism reverses this assumption entirely. The brain does not generate consciousness. It receives and localizes it, much like a radio receives a signal that already exists. If this is true, then the human mind is not isolated. Each individual consciousness is a localized expression of a universal mind, temporarily focused through a body and personality. You are not separate from the source. You are an extension of it. Yet if we are expressions of this infinite mind, a question arises that every seeker eventually faces. Why do we feel so small? Why do we feel disconnected? Why does the world appear external and indifferent to us? Hermetic philosophy answers this by pointing to limitation of perception. Human consciousness operates through filters: culture, memory, language, emotion, survival instincts. These filters create the illusion of separation. The mind forgets its origin and begins to identify only with the form it inhabits. This forgetting is not a mistake. It is part of the experience. Without limitation, there would be no individuality. Without individuality, there would be no story, no learning, no evolution of awareness. The material world feels solid because consciousness is slowed down, condensed, focused. Reality appears fixed because the mind observes it consistently in the same way. But beneath this apparent solidity lies a fluid, responsive field shaped by perception itself. Modern science has begun to approach this ancient idea from a different direction. Quantum physics reveals that at the smallest scales of existence, matter does not behave like solid objects. Particles exist as probabilities until observed. The act of observation collapses potential into form. This does not mean that the human mind creates reality arbitrarily, but it does mean that consciousness participates in shaping how reality appears. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, stated clearly that consciousness is fundamental and matter is secondary. Reality, in his view, does not exist independently of awareness. Hermes Trismegistus taught the same truth thousands of years earlier. The principle of mentalism tells us that reality is not happening to us. It is happening through us. But this realization is only the beginning, because if the universe is mental, then attention becomes power. And the question becomes, who controls your attention? Observation, thought, and the architecture of reality. If the universe exists within mind, then observation is not passive. It is creative. Hermetic philosophy teaches that reality does not merely exist out there, waiting to be discovered. Instead, reality takes shape through interaction with consciousness. What we perceive is not raw existence. It is existence filtered, organized, and stabilized by mind. This idea finds one of its most striking confirmations in modern physics through the famous double-slit experiment. When particles such as electrons are fired through two openings without being observed, they behave like waves, spreading across space as probabilities. But when observation is introduced, when consciousness attempts to measure or detect their position, the particles abruptly change behavior. They become localized, defined, solid. In other words, the act of observation alters reality itself. This discovery shook the foundations of material science. It suggested that matter does not have fixed properties independent of observation. Instead, matter responds to awareness. The universe behaves less like a machine and more like a responsive system, sensitive to attention. Hermeticists were never surprised by this. For them, observation is the moment when potential collapses into form. Thought acts as a mold. Attention acts as pressure. Reality responds accordingly. This does not mean that an individual mind controls the universe at will. Hermeticism does not teach fantasy or delusion. Rather, it teaches participation. Consciousness shapes probabilities, tendencies, directions, not instant miracles, but long-term patterns. Think of the universe as an ocean of potential. Consciousness does not create the ocean, but it determines which waves rise, which currents strengthen, and which directions are reinforced over time. Every sustained thought is a vibration impressed upon the mental field. Every belief is a structure repeated until it hardens into experience. This is why thoughts are not neutral. A single thought may pass without effect, but repeated thoughts carve grooves into perception. Over time, these grooves shape expectations, decisions, behaviors, and eventually outcomes. Reality begins to mirror what the mind consistently projects, not because of superstition, but because mind determines perception and perception determines action. The Hermetic axiom teaches that the mind is the first cause in the chain of manifestation. Before action, there is thought. Before form, there is idea. Before outcome, there is intention. What we call external reality is often the delayed echo of internal states. This principle becomes especially important when we consider how the modern world treats attention. Never before in human history has attention been fragmented on such a massive scale. Notifications, endless content, constant stimulation, all of it pulls awareness outward, dispersing focus. Hermetic teachings warn that a scattered mind is a powerless mind. Attention is a lens through which creative force is concentrated. When focus is sharp, intention gains strength. When attention is fragmented, intention dissolves. The individual becomes reactive instead of creative, responding to stimuli rather than shaping experience. In ancient mystery schools, Students were trained first not in rituals, but in control of thought and attention. Without mastery of focus, no deeper knowledge could be safely accessed. A mind that cannot remain still cannot wield creative power responsibly. This is why distraction is not merely inconvenience. It is disempowerment. The more attention is stolen, the less capacity remains for conscious creation. Beliefs are absorbed unconsciously. Emotional reactions are triggered automatically. Reality is experienced as something that happens to the individual rather than through them. This is the true meaning of mental slavery. Yet Hermeticism offers a way back. The principle of mentalism reminds us that the mind can be trained, refined, and reclaimed. Awareness can be gathered. Focus can be restored. Thought can be chosen rather than inherited. And when this happens, something shifts. Reality begins to feel less hostile, less random, less overwhelming. Patterns become visible. Cause and effect become clearer. The individual starts to recognize their role as a participant in the unfolding of experience. But to regain this power, one must confront the deepest layer of the mind, the one that operates beneath conscious awareness, the subconscious mind, the hidden architect of reality. If conscious thought is the surface of the mind, then the subconscious is its foundation. Hermetic wisdom teaches that while the conscious mind chooses, analyzes, and decides, the subconscious mind executes, records, and manifests. This distinction is crucial. Most people believe they live according to conscious choice, yet the vast majority of human behavior is governed by subconscious programming. Habits, emotional reactions, self-image, fears, and expectations all originate below the threshold of awareness. The subconscious does not reason, it accepts. It does not judge, it records. And once it accepts an idea, it works tirelessly to express it as reality. From a Hermetic perspective, the subconscious mind is a bridge between the universal mind and individual experience. It is the mechanism through which mental patterns become lived conditions. Imagine the subconscious as fertile soil. Whatever is planted repeatedly, whether consciously or unconsciously, will eventually grow. The soil does not distinguish between seeds of wisdom or seeds of limitation. It nurtures all impressions equally. This explains why many people intellectually desire change, yet emotionally remain trapped in the same cycles. The conscious mind may affirm success, love, or peace, but the subconscious may still carry older instructions: unworthiness, fear, scarcity, separation. When these hidden programs conflict with conscious intention, the subconscious always wins. Hermetic teachings describe this as the illusion of free will. Freedom exists, but only to the degree that the mind has been purified of unconscious conditioning. Modern psychology confirms this insight. Studies show that subconscious beliefs formed in early life shape adult perception long after their origin is forgotten. Experiences charged with emotion imprint deeply, creating internal maps that guide behavior automatically. Fear, once recorded, becomes expectation. Expectation becomes perception. Perception becomes reality. This is why the subconscious is often referred to as the silent creator. Every image consumed, every word repeated, every emotional reaction reinforced becomes part of the subconscious archive. Over time, this archive defines what feels possible, safe, or inevitable. Hermetic masters understood this danger long before neuroscience. They warned that unexamined beliefs become destiny. The world we perceive is not neutral. It is filtered through subconscious assumptions. Two people can experience the same event and interpret it completely differently, not because reality changed, but because their inner programs differ. This is why transformation must begin within. The subconscious responds most strongly to emotion and repetition. Ideas charged with feeling embed faster and manifest more powerfully. This is why trauma imprints deeply, and also why love, gratitude, and confidence can reprogram just as effectively when cultivated intentionally. Here we encounter one of the most important Hermetic tools: mental imagery combined with emotion. Visualization is not fantasy. It is instruction. When the subconscious receives a repeated image infused with emotion, it treats it as memory, and memories shape behavior. The subconscious does not distinguish between what has happened and what has been vividly imagined. This is why athletes mentally rehearse success, and why spiritual traditions use symbols, rituals, and meditative imagery. Meditation plays a central role here. In Hermetic practice, meditation is not escape, it is alignment. When the mind becomes still, the boundary between conscious and subconscious softens. In this state, buried beliefs rise to the surface, where they can be observed, dissolved, and rewritten. Silence reveals what noise conceals. Through meditation, the practitioner learns to witness thought rather than be ruled by it. Old patterns lose authority. Awareness regains command. The subconscious becomes an ally instead of saboteur. This is the moment where the principle of mentalism becomes practical. To master reality, one must first master inner dialogue. To command outcomes, one must first command attention. To shape destiny, one must first rewrite belief. The Hermetic axiom does not exaggerate when it declares, all is mind, not because reality is imaginary, but because mind is the medium through which reality becomes experience. And once this truth is understood, a deeper question emerges. If mind creates reality, and reality follows law, then what governs the movement of mind itself? Mental vibration, focus, and the mechanics of creation. Thought does not remain still. According to Hermetic philosophy, every thought is movement within the mental field. This movement generates vibration, and vibration determines influence. A weak, fleeting thought barely disturbs the mental atmosphere, while a focused and emotionally charged thought sends waves that propagate far beyond the individual mind. This is where the principle of mentalism merges with the principle of vibration, revealing that creation is not an act of force, but a frequency. Modern neuroscience confirms that the brain operates through electrical impulses and oscillating wave patterns. Different mental states correspond to different frequencies. Heightened stress, calm awareness, creative flow, deep intuition. These frequencies are not symbolic. They are measurable. Hermeticism anticipated this understanding by centuries. The ancient teachings describe the mind as a transmitter and receiver, constantly emitting mental vibrations and responding to those encounters. Thoughts attract similar thoughts. Emotional states resonate with corresponding conditions. Like tunes like, this is not mystical exaggeration. It is resonance. When the mind is scattered, its vibration is incoherent. Thoughts contradict one another. Desire conflicts with fear. Intention is diluted. In this state, creation becomes chaotic. Outcomes appear inconsistent, unpredictable, or misaligned. When the mind is focused, vibration becomes coherent. Thought aligns with emotion. Intention sharpens. The individual moves from reaction to authorship. This coherence is a hidden mechanism behind influence, charisma, and inner authority. People with focused minds radiate certainty. Their presence affects others without effort. Their words carry weight not because of volume, but because of internal alignment. Hermetic initiates trained extensively in concentration. Before studying higher mysteries, students were required to master attention, holding a single image, symbol, or concept without drift. This was not discipline for its own sake. It was preparation for creation. A focused mind acts like a magnifying lens. Diffused light warms, concentrated light ignites. In contrast, modern life constantly fractures attention. Information overload, emotional stimulation, and digital noise weaken mental coherence. The result is a population rich in information, but poor in clarity. Thought becomes reactive. Emotion becomes volatile. Identity becomes fragmented. This fragmentation is not harmless. It disperses creative power. Hermeticism teaches that wherever attention flows, energy follows. What you consistently focus on grows, not because the universe rewards thought, but because focus determines behavior, perception, and interpretation. Repeated focus rewires the subconscious. Rewired subconscious alters expectation. Altered expectation reshapes experience. This is the hidden architecture of manifestation. Meditation re-enters here as a corrective force. Through stillness, the mental field regains coherence. Thoughts slow, emotional noise settles. The practitioner begins to experience a gap between thought and awareness. In that gap lies freedom. A mind that can observe thought without being carried by it gains sovereignty. From this position, intention becomes deliberate, creation becomes conscious. Hermetic teachings emphasize that will is not forceful desire. True will arises from clarity. It is the calm, unwavering direction of attention over time. This is why patience and discipline are always emphasized alongside wisdom. The universe responds not to desperation, but to consistency. A scattered desire sends conflicting signals. A centered intention generates resonance. Here, the principle of mentalism reveals its final layer. Mastery of mind is mastery of reality, not because mind dominates matter, but because mind determines relationship to matter. The external world becomes less reactive and more responsive as internal coherence increases. But mental vibration alone is not enough. Thought must move in harmony with universal patterns. To understand those patterns, we must now step beyond the mind and examine the structure of reality itself. The mirror structure of reality. As above, so below. As within, so without. This ancient Hermetic axiom is not poetry, metaphor, or spiritual decoration. It is a structural law of reality, a description of how existence organizes itself across all levels of being. The principle of correspondence teaches that the universe is not fragmented. Reality is layered, but those layers reflect one another. The same intelligence that shapes galaxies also structures atoms. The same patterns governing the cosmos operate within the human mind. Nothing exists in isolation. Hermetic philosophy proposes that reality functions like a series of mirrors, each reflecting the same fundamental order at different scales. What appears vast and external has an internal analog. What appears internal echoes outward into form. This is why ancient initiates believed self-knowledge was the gateway to universal knowledge. To understand the cosmos, they said, study the soul. To understand the soul, observe nature. Modern science has begun to rediscover this truth through unexpected avenues. Fractal mathematics reveals that complex systems repeat identical patterns across scales. A coastline viewed from space mirrors its shape when viewed up close. Blood vessels branch like rivers. Neural networks resemble cosmic webs. Nature repeats itself because it obeys a single organizing intelligence. Hermeticism called this intelligence the all, not a personal deity, but a foundational principle from which all form arises. According to the law of correspondence, the all expresses itself everywhere in proportion, symmetry, and resonance. The human being is therefore not separate from the universe, but a microcosmic reflection of it. Your thoughts, emotions, habits, and beliefs are not isolated psychological events. They are internal expressions of universal processes. Likewise, your external circumstances are not random. They are symbolic responses to inner states. This does not mean life is simplistic or deterministic. It means reality is relational. When inner order exists, outer order tends to follow. When inner chaos dominates, outer confusion mirrors it. This relationship is not punishment or reward. It is correspondence. Ancient mystics understood that the human body itself is a symbolic universe. The heart reflects the sun, rhythmic, central, life-sustaining. The brain mirrors the heavens, electrical, expansive, pattern-driven. Breath reflects cosmic cycles, expansion and contraction, birth and dissolution. The ancients did not see these as coincidences. They saw them as confirmations. Spiritual traditions across cultures echo this same truth. In the Gospels, Jesus states, "The kingdom of God is within you." In Eastern philosophy, the individual is described as a condensed universe. Indigenous cosmologies describe humans as living extensions of the land. The message is consistent. What happens within you is not separate from what happens around you. Psychology reinforces this principle. Perception shapes experience. Belief filters reality. Two people can encounter the same event and experience entirely different worlds. Why? Because correspondence is active. Your internal state does not change the world directly. It changes how the world responds to you and how you respond to it. Over time, this feedback loop solidifies into patterns we call fate, luck, or destiny. Hermetic initiates rejected these terms. They spoke instead of alignment. When inner and outer are aligned, life flows with fewer obstacles. When misaligned, resistance increases. This resistance is not failure. It is information. The universe constantly communicates through reflection. The challenge is learning how to read the mirror. But correspondence does not stop at psychology. It extends into matter, energy, biology, and even time itself. To understand how deeply this law penetrates existence, we must examine how spirit and matter reflect one another across planes of reality. Planes of reality, spirit, mind, and matter. The principle of correspondence does not operate on a single level. It functions across planes of existence, each reflecting the others with precision. Hermetic philosophy describes reality as structured into multiple planes, most commonly the spiritual, mental, and physical. These are not separate worlds, but different densities of the same underlying essence. Spirit is the causal plane. Mind is the formative plane. Matter is the manifested plane. What exists physically is not the origin of reality, but its final expression, according to Hermetic teaching. Every form begins as an idea. Every idea arises from consciousness, and every physical event is the crystallization of an invisible cause. Matter is not primary, it is derivative. This is why ancient alchemists did not merely work with metals. Their laboratories were symbolic extensions of the inner world. The true transformation, they taught, occurred before the substance changed form. The famous alchemical axiom states, "As within, so without." The transformation of lead into gold was meaningless without the refinement of the operator's consciousness. Modern physics now echoes this worldview. At the quantum level, particles do not behave as solid objects but as probabilities, waves of potential that collapse into form when observed. Matter emerges from invisible fields governed by laws that exist prior to physical manifestation. In other words, the physical world obeys instructions issued from subtler planes. Biology offers another mirror. DNA, an invisible code, determines the structure of the entire organism. The body is not self-directing. It follows a pattern encoded at a deeper level. The visible form is an echo of an unseen blueprint. Hermeticists recognized this long before microscopes existed. They taught that the human mind functions in the same way. Thoughts are not neutral. Beliefs act as organizing codes. Emotional patterns shape perception. Over time, these internal structures imprint themselves onto lived experience. This is not superstition. It is correspondence in action. A person who consistently carries fear interprets neutral events as threats. Someone grounded in trust perceives opportunity where others see danger. The external world has not changed, but its meaning has. The mental plane shapes interpretation. Interpretation shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Thus, the spiritual plane, intention, meaning, awareness, initiates movement. The mental plane translates it into patterns. The physical plane reflects the result. Understanding this hierarchy is essential. Most people attempt to change their lives at the level of effect, adjusting circumstances without addressing causes. Hermeticism reverses this approach. Change the cause and the effect follows. This does not imply instant results or magical thinking. The correspondence between planes operates through time, rhythm, and accumulation. Just as seasons do not change overnight, inner transformations require integration. Yet, once alignment begins, reality responds. Ancient sages taught that illness often reflects mental imbalance, and mental imbalance often reflects spiritual disconnection. While this should never be reduced to blame, it reveals a deeper truth. The body speaks the language of the unseen. Likewise, prosperity, stagnation, conflict, and harmony often mirror internal structures long before they appear externally. Correspondence is not moral. It is mechanical. It does not judge, it reflects. When this law is understood, responsibility replaces victimhood. Not guilt, but agency. The realization dawns that by working inwardly, one participates consciously in shaping outward life. But correspondence does not only flow downward from spirit to matter, it also flows upward. Actions reshape beliefs. Habits influence identity. Discipline clarifies intention. Matter informs mind just as mind informs matter. Reality is not a hierarchy of domination. It is a feedback loop. To master this principle is to learn how to consciously participate in that loop. But correspondence reveals itself most clearly when we observe how nature repeats the same patterns across vastly different scales. Fractals, geometry, and the signature of the whole. If the universe truly reflects itself across planes, then this harmony should not be merely philosophical. It should be visible. And it is. One of the clearest confirmations of the principle of correspondence appears in the geometry of nature itself. Through fractals, proportion, and repeating forms that exist across radically different scales. A fractal is a structure that repeats its pattern regardless of size. Whether magnified or reduced, the same shape reappears. This phenomenon is not artistic coincidence. It is mathematical law. Consider the branching of trees. The structure of a single branch mirrors the structure of the entire tree. Rivers divide into tributaries using the same pattern. Lightning fractures the sky in shapes identical to neural pathways in the brain. Even the structure of the lungs resembles inverted trees, optimized for maximum exchange through repetition. These are not random designs. They are expressions of a universal organizing intelligence. On a cosmic scale, spiral galaxies follow the same proportional curves as hurricanes on Earth. The Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical ratio found in seashells, flowers, pine cones, and human anatomy, also governs the spacing of planetary orbits and the arms of galaxies. The same code writes the small and the vast. This is why ancient traditions spoke of sacred geometry, not as mystical ornamentation, but as the architecture of reality itself. Geometry was considered sacred because it revealed the invisible order behind visible form. Plato taught that geometry was a language of creation. Pythagoras believed number was the essence of all things. For Hermeticists, these ideas were confirmations of correspondence in action. The universe does not invent new rules at different scales. It applies the same ones everywhere. Atoms resemble miniature solar systems, with electrons orbiting a nucleus just as planets orbit a star. While mechanics differ, the pattern of central force and orbital motion remains. This repetition is not accidental. It suggests that reality is holographic, that each part contains information about the whole. Modern physics has begun to explore this idea through holographic theory, proposing that the universe may encode its information on surfaces rather than volumes. In such a model, each region contains a compressed version of the total structure. Hermetic philosophy anticipated this thousands of years ago. As above, so below does not mean similarity in appearance alone. It means identity of law. The same intelligence that governs galaxies governs growth, decay, balance, and transformation in human life. This insight radically alters how we interpret existence. Struggle, expansion, contraction, and renewal are not personal failures or arbitrary events. They are expressions of universal rhythm playing out at a local scale. Your life is not separate from cosmic order. It is a localized expression of it. When chaos appears, it often signals a phase transition. Just as stars collapse before becoming supernovae, or caterpillars dissolve before becoming butterflies, the pattern repeats. The Hermetic initiate learns to read these patterns not as threats, but as signals. When resistance appears internally, it often reflects external friction. When stagnation appears externally, it often mirrors internal hesitation. The mirror does not lie, it only reflects. This does not imply control over every event. It implies understanding of alignment. A musician cannot command the laws of sound, but by understanding them, they can create harmony instead of noise. Correspondence teaches us to become musicians of reality rather than victims of its volume. And once this principle is grasped intellectually, it demands application. Because if the world reflects us, then transformation cannot begin anywhere else but within. The inner mirror and the architecture of daily life. If the universe truly reflects itself across scales, then this law must also operate in the most intimate arena of all, daily life. Hermetic wisdom does not stop at cosmic metaphors. It descends into habits, routines, health, relationships, and outcomes. The macrocosm expresses itself through the microcosm, not only in galaxies and atoms, but in choices repeated quietly every day. The inner world does not shout, it accumulates. A disciplined mind produces order and action. An undisciplined mind leaks disorder into behavior. Over time, this invisible inner state crystallizes into visible form. This is correspondence at work. A person who consistently nurtures clarity, patience, and intention often finds their life structured, resilient, and purposeful. Their environment mirrors their internal coherence. Their body reflects rhythm. Their relationships echo balance. Conversely, a scattered inner world generates scattered outcomes. When attention is fractured and intention is weak, life reflects that fragmentation. Missed opportunities, chronic stress, and chaotic circumstances are not punishments. They are mirrors. This is not moral judgment. It is mechanical law. The body itself is a record of inner correspondence. Chronic tension often reflects suppressed emotion. Fatigue mirrors unresolved resistance. Vitality corresponds with alignment between intention, belief, and action. Ancient physicians understood this. They treated illness not only as physical malfunction, but as disrupted harmony between internal and external forces. Even modern psychology confirms this principle. Habits form through repetition of thought, emotion, and action. What begins as a mental tendency eventually becomes behavior, then identity, then environment. The Hermeticist understands this chain and intervenes early, at the level of thought and intention, where causes are still subtle and malleable. Small actions matter because they are not small. Drinking water daily, choosing silence over reaction, moving the body regularly, returning attention to breath. These are not lifestyle tips. They are acts of alignment. Each repetition tunes the inner world, and the outer world responds accordingly. This is why sudden transformation is rare, but gradual metamorphosis is inevitable. Life does not leap, it corresponds. The farmer who tends soil daily does not panic over seeds unseen. They trust the law. Likewise, the initiate does not obsess over immediate results. They focus on cultivating internal order, knowing that external order must follow. This principle also applies to relationships. Conflict often reflects internal contradiction. Attraction mirrors internal resonance. We do not meet others by accident. We meet reflections. The people who challenge us often illuminate unresolved aspects within. The people who inspire us reveal dormant potential we have not yet embodied. As above, so below. As within, so without. When this principle is fully absorbed, blame dissolves. Victimhood collapses. Responsibility returns, not as burden, but as power. Because the outer world reflects the inner, then change is always possible. Not through force, through alignment. And this alignment is not mystical abstraction. It is practical discipline, repeated gently, relentlessly, and consciously, from reflection to mastery. Understanding the principle of correspondence intellectually is only the first step. True Hermetic wisdom begins when this law is applied consciously. Most people live inside correspondence without realizing it. They experience effects but remain blind to causes. The initiate, however, learns to work upstream, shaping the inner world deliberately so the outer world must follow. This is a transition from unconscious reflection to conscious mastery. Hermes taught that the wise do not fight appearances. They adjust origins. Since outer circumstances are echoes, struggling with them directly is inefficient. Instead, the Hermetic path focuses on the source pattern within the mind and spirit. To master correspondence, one must first cultivate self-observation. This means learning to witness thoughts, emotions, and reactions without immediately identifying with them. Observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates transformation. When a situation repeats, a familiar conflict, obstacle, or limitation, the initiate does not ask, "Why does this keep happening to me?" They ask, "What pattern within me is being mirrored?" This shift alone dissolves half the illusion. Patterns persist because they are maintained internally. When the inner configuration changes, the reflection must adjust. Reality has no option. It obeys structure. This is why sudden external change without internal change rarely lasts. A new job, relationship, or environment will eventually reorganize itself to match the unchanged inner state. Correspondence is patient. It waits. To consciously work with this law, Hermetic teaching emphasizes alignment across planes. Thought aligned with intention. Intention aligned with action. Action aligned with rhythm. When these layers contradict each other, friction arises. When they resonate, momentum forms. The initiate also learns symbolic thinking. Since the universe communicates through patterns, metaphors, and cycles, events are read symbolically rather than literally. A delay may represent misalignment. Resistance may indicate internal conflict. Expansion may signal coherence. Nothing is meaningless. Ancient alchemists encoded this mastery in their language. When they spoke of turning lead into gold, they referred not merely to matter, but to states of consciousness. Lead was confusion, inertia, fragmentation. Gold was clarity, unity, and purpose. Transformation always began inside. This mastery does not require perfection, only consistency. The Hermeticist does not wait to feel inspired. They cultivate order even when motivation fluctuates, trusting the law to respond over time. Eventually, life becomes less reactive and more responsive. Circumstances soften, obstacles rearrange, opportunities appear naturally, without force, not because the world has changed, but because the correspondence has shifted. The initiate realizes they are not separate from the cosmos, but structured by the same intelligence. To know oneself deeply is to understand a universe in miniature. As Plotinus wrote, withdraw into yourself and look. When this law is embodied, life ceases to feel random. Meaning emerges not as belief, but as recognition. The mirror becomes clear. Nothing rests, everything moves. Before form, before structure, before even thought itself, there is motion. The principle of vibration reveals one of the most unsettling and liberating truths of Hermetic wisdom. Nothing is static. What appears solid, fixed, or permanent is merely vibration slowed to a degree perceivable by the senses. Hermes stated it simply: nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This law dismantles the illusion of stillness. A stone appears unmoving. A mountain seems eternal. Yet at their most fundamental level, there are seas of motion, particles oscillating, fields interacting, energies pulsing in patterns beyond ordinary perception. Ancient initiates understood what modern science only confirmed millennia later. Matter is not substance, it is activity. Vibration is the bridge between the visible and the invisible. In Hermetic teaching, vibration explains how spirit becomes matter, how mind becomes form, how the unseen expresses itself as experience. Without vibration, correspondence would remain static. Without vibration, polarity could not shift. Without vibration, creation itself would freeze. This law operates across all planes of existence: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. A thought vibrates. An emotion vibrates. A belief vibrates. Each has a frequency, a tempo, a signature. You do not merely have emotions. You broadcast them. You do not merely think thoughts. You tune yourself to certain ranges of experience. The universe responds not to words, but to frequency. This is why two people can face identical circumstances and experience entirely different realities. Their inner vibration filters perception, opportunity, and outcome. Hermeticism teaches that consciousness is not passive. It is an active oscillation interacting with the greater field of existence. Modern physics echoes this insight. Atoms are not tiny solid balls. They are probability clouds, vibrating fields, empty space in motion. Even at absolute zero, particles still fluctuate. Stillness does not exist. Rest is an illusion created by scale. From the Hermetic perspective, the universe is not a machine. It is a resonant field. Everything influences everything else through vibration. This realization changes how one relates to reality. If everything vibrates, then change does not require force. It requires frequency adjustment. One does not destroy a state. One outgrows it. One does not fight darkness. One raises light. The initiate begins to understand that mastery is not domination, but attunement. Just as a musician tunes an instrument before playing, the Hermetic practitioner learns to tune their inner state. When inner vibration shifts, outer circumstances reorganize automatically. This is not metaphor. It is law. In this chapter, we will explore how vibration governs matter, emotion, thought, intuition, and destiny itself, and how those who understand it gain access to one of the most powerful tools of transformation known to humanity: energy, frequency, and illusion of matter. To understand vibration is to understand that matter is not solid. It is organized movement. What your senses interpret as firmness is, in truth, resistance created by interacting frequencies. The table you touch feels solid not because it is dense, but because the electromagnetic vibrations of your atoms repel those of the table. Solidity is an agreement between oscillating fields. Hermetic sages grasped this long before microscopes or particle accelerators existed. They taught that matter is condensed spirit, energy slowed, rhythm restrained, vibration lowered until form emerges. Modern physics confirms this with startling precision. Atoms are composed almost entirely of empty space. At their core are nuclei surrounded by electrons that do not orbit like planets, but exist as probability waves, pulses of potential rather than fixed points. These waves vibrate continuously, never still, never fixed. Even light, once thought to be a pure wave, behaves as both wave and particle, depending on how it is observed. Reality shifts based on interaction. This is not coincidence. It is resonance. Hermeticism teaches that the universe is structured by rates of vibration. Higher frequencies manifest as subtle realities, thought, intuition, consciousness. Lower frequencies manifest as dense realities, form, matter, structure. Nothing is separate, only slower or faster. This explains why emotions feel heavy or light, why certain places drain you while others uplift you, why certain people seem to expand your awareness while others contract it. You are not reacting to their words. You are responding to their frequency. Every thought emits a vibration. Every emotion amplifies it. Fear tightens frequency. Love expands it. Shame collapses it. Gratitude elevates it. This is not poetic language. It is energetic mechanics. When the Hermetic texts state that the all is mind, vibration explains how that mind becomes experience. Consciousness vibrates into patterns. Patterns stabilize into realities. Realities persist as long as the vibration sustains them. Change the vibration, and the pattern dissolves. This is why initiates speak of raising or lowering states of being. Spiritual ascent is not travel through space. It is movement along a vibrational spectrum. The difference between despair and hope is not circumstance. It is frequency. The difference between ignorance and insight is not intelligence. It is resonance. Even memory vibrates. Trauma persists not because of time, but because its frequency remains locked in the nervous system. Healing occurs when vibration shifts and the stored pattern releases. The ancients understood this intuitively. Modern science is now mapping it mathematically. Einstein famously stated that everything in the universe is energy. But Hermeticism goes further. Energy responds to consciousness. Vibration is the medium through which mind influences matter. This is why intention matters. This is why emotional coherence amplifies manifestation. This is why chaos breeds chaos, and harmony invites harmony. You are not a passive observer in a vibrating universe. You are a transmitter within it. Thought, emotion, and mechanics of resonance. If all things vibrate, then thought is not silent. It is movement. Every idea, image, or belief generates oscillation within the mind. This oscillation does not remain confined to the brain. It radiates outward as an energetic signature, interacting continuously with the surrounding field. Ancient Hermetic texts taught that thought precedes form, but vibration explains how this translation occurs. A thought begins as a subtle frequency. When sustained through emotion, it gains coherence. When reinforced through repetition, it stabilizes into pattern, and when pattern persists, reality reorganizes itself around it. This is resonance. In physics, resonance occurs when one vibrating system influences another at a matching frequency. A tuning fork causes another fork of the same pitch to vibrate, without physical contact. The Hermetic masters applied this same principle to consciousness. Like attracts like, not symbolically but vibrationally. Fear attracts circumstances that resonate with fear. Confidence draws experiences that echo confidence. This is not reward or punishment. It is alignment. Modern neuroscience supports this insight. Brainwave activity shifts according to mental states. Beta waves dominate during stress and survival-focused thinking. Alpha waves appear during relaxed awareness. Theta waves arise in meditation, creativity, and deep intuition. Each state corresponds to a distinct vibrational pattern. Emotion intensifies this effect. Thought alone generates frequency, but emotion amplifies it exponentially. A fleeting idea carries little power. A thought infused with strong emotion imprints deeply upon the nervous system and the subconscious. This is why emotionally charged memories persist, and why emotionally charged intentions manifest more readily. The subconscious mind operates not through logic, but through vibration and imagery. It responds to how something feels, not whether it is rational. When emotion and thought align, the subconscious accepts the signal as real and begins reorganizing perception and behavior accordingly. Here lies the hidden mechanism of belief. A belief is simply a rehearsed vibration. Repeat an idea often enough, emotionally enough, and the subconscious treats it as truth. Once accepted, it influences decisions, reactions, opportunities noticed, and even biological responses. This explains why two people can experience the same event and emerge with entirely different realities. Their interpretations vibrate differently. Their internal resonance determines what unfolds next. Hermetic teachings insist that mastery begins not with action, but with inner tuning. One does not fight unwanted outcomes. One alters a frequency that sustains them. This is why discipline of thought was considered sacred. Not moral discipline, energetic discipline. To think deliberately is to vibrate deliberately. Silence is not emptiness. It is reset. Attention is not passive. It is directional force. Where attention rests, vibration gathers. This understanding transforms responsibility. You are not blamed for every circumstance, but you are accountable for frequency you maintain once awareness dawns. The initiate learns to observe thoughts without attachment, emotions without identification. In doing so, they reclaim authorship of their vibrational output. They no longer react automatically. They resonate intentionally. This is the bridge between unconscious creation and conscious mastery. Frequency, health, and the invisible architecture of the body. If vibration governs all things, then the human body is not merely a biological machine. It is a field of oscillating frequencies, layered, responsive, and deeply intelligent. Ancient Hermetic initiates understood the body as a condensed waveform. What appears solid is, at its core, rhythmic motion slowed to visibility. Bones, organs, blood, and nerves all exist as patterns of organized vibration held in temporary form. Modern science now echoes this insight. Cells communicate through electromagnetic signals. The heart emits a measurable field that extends beyond the physical body. The brain operates through rhythmic electrical pulses. Every biological process, from digestion to healing, depends on oscillation and timing. Health, then, is not merely chemical balance. It is vibrational coherence. When the body systems vibrate in harmony, energy flows efficiently. When coherence is disrupted, stagnation appears, and stagnation precedes disease. This is why stress manifests physically. Chronic fear, anxiety, and resentment are not just emotional states. They are low, chaotic frequencies. When sustained, they interfere with cellular communication, disrupt hormonal rhythms, and weaken immune response. The body listens to the mind because both operate within the same vibrational field. Hermetic teachings did not separate healing from consciousness. Illness was understood as a signal of disharmony, not punishment. The question was never what is wrong with you, but where has rhythm been lost? Modern psychosomatic medicine confirms this ancient view. Long-term emotional patterns correlate strongly with specific physical conditions. The body externalizes unresolved vibration. But vibration does not only descend, it can be elevated. Practices such as breath work, meditation, sound, movement, and intentional silence recalibrate internal frequencies. This is not metaphor. Slow breathing alters brain waves. Focused awareness stabilizes nervous system oscillations. Sound frequencies influence cellular activity. This is why chanting, mantras, and sacred tones appear in nearly every ancient spiritual tradition. Sound is vibration made audible. Certain frequencies soothe, others energize, others disrupt. The Hermetic initiate learn to tune the body like an instrument, restoring harmony through rhythm rather than force. Intuition also emerges from elevated vibration. When internal noise quiets, subtler frequencies become perceptible. Insight does not arrive through reasoning alone. It arises through resonance. A calm, coherent system detects information that a chaotic one cannot. This is why intuitive clarity often appears in moments of stillness, deep relaxation, or heightened presence. The mind becomes a receiver. Higher states of awareness correspond to higher frequency brainwave patterns. Theta and gamma states, associated with insight and transcendence, arise when internal vibration becomes synchronized rather than fragmented. This is the scientific shadow of what mystics call attunement. To raise vibration is not to escape the body. It is to inhabit it more fully. The goal is not denial of matter, but refinement of the energy that animates it. The Hermetic path teaches that spirit does not override matter. It informs it. When thought, emotion, and physiology vibrate coherently, perception expands. Health stabilizes. Intuition sharpens. The individual becomes aligned rather than divided. This alignment is not permanent. Vibration always moves, but mastery lies in return to coherence consciously. The initiate learns to recognize dissonance early and correct it gently, before it crystallizes into form. Thus, healing becomes preventative. Awareness becomes medicine. Perception, reality, and the spectrum of awareness. Reality is not experienced directly. It is decoded. What you perceive as the world is not the world itself, but a translation filtered through your vibrational state. The Hermetic masters understood this long before neuroscience could explain it. Perception is not passive reception. It is active interpretation. Vibration determines what is perceived, how it is interpreted, and which layers of reality remain invisible. Consider light. The human eye perceives only a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum. Infrared, ultraviolet, gamma rays, all exist, yet remain unseen unless instruments translate them. Their invisibility does not negate their presence. Consciousness operates the same way. Human awareness accesses only a limited range of frequencies at any given time. What lies outside that range is not absent. It is simply beyond resonance. This explains why two individuals can stand in the same place, witness the same event, and leave with entirely different meanings. Each perceives through their internal frequency filter. Fear-based perception narrows reality. It highlights threat, absence, and limitation. Love-based perception expands it, revealing connection, possibility, and nuance. Neither adds or subtracts facts. They alter emphasis. This is why Hermetic teachings emphasize state over circumstance. Change the state, and the world rearranges itself accordingly. Modern psychology confirms this principle. Cognitive bias, emotional priming, and expectation directly shape sensory interpretation. The brain does not merely receive data. It predicts, selects, and edits. Vibration is the hidden variable behind these processes. When vibration is low and chaotic, perception fragments. Attention becomes scattered. Meaning collapses into survival-based interpretation. The world appears hostile, random, or oppressive. When vibration is coherent and elevated, perception integrates. Patterns become visible. Synchronicities emerge. Meaning expands beyond immediate utility. This is not delusion. It is access. Hermetic initiates were trained to refine perception through vibrational discipline. They did not seek vision for spectacle, but clarity for alignment. Seeing more was not the goal. Seeing accurately was. Higher perception does not replace logic. It contextualizes it. This is why mysticism and science were not opposed in ancient traditions. Both sought understanding, one through measurement, the other through resonance. At elevated vibrational states, the boundary between subject and object softens. The observer begins to sense participation rather than separation. Reality feels responsive, symbolic, alive. This experience gave rise to the Hermetic axiom. The universe is mental, not because matter does not exist, but because meaning arises through consciousness. As vibration rises, time perception shifts. Moments feel spacious. Insight appears timeless. This occurs because internal rhythm slows and synchronizes. Urgency dissolves. Presence deepens. In such states, intuition becomes reliable not because it is mystical, but because perception is less distorted by fear and fragmentation. Truth becomes easier to recognize when the noise subsides. This is why ancient initiations always included periods of silence, fasting, isolation, or rhythmic discipline. These were not punishments. They were recalibrations. Lower vibration binds perception to repetition. Higher vibration reveals choice. But elevation is not escape. One cannot permanently remain in expanded states. Vibration moves. The pendulum swings. The work is not transcendence, but navigation. The initiate learns to descend consciously, bringing insight into action, and to ascend deliberately when clarity is needed. This is balance, not denial. Thus, the principle of vibration teaches not only how reality functions, but why mastery requires awareness of frequency. You do not change the world by force. You change the lens through which it is experienced. And when the lens changes, the image follows that self-mastery, frequency control, and the alchemy of being. At the highest level, the principle of vibration is not about understanding energy. It is about governance. The Hermetic masters taught that wisdom is not the accumulation of knowledge, but the ability to regulate one's internal state regardless of external conditions. This is what separates the initiate from the unawakened, the power to remain centered while the pendulum swings. Everything vibrates, but not everything chooses its vibration. Most people live reactively. Their frequency rises and falls according to events, opinions, memories, and emotions they have not examined. External circumstances dictate internal states. In Hermetic language, such a person is moved by vibration rather than directing it. Self-mastery begins the moment this dynamic is reversed. To master vibration is not to suppress emotion, nor deny human experience. It is to understand that emotions are waves, not identities. They arise, peak, and dissolve according to law. When observed without resistance, they pass without controlling the will. This is why the initiate is trained in transmutation. Transmutation is the art of shifting vibrational state intentionally, not by force, but by awareness. Fear is not eliminated. It is transformed into caution. Anger is not denied. It is refined into clarity and resolve. Desire is not repressed. It is redirected toward creation. This is internal alchemy. The ancient texts emphasize that vibration moves on a scale. Polarity exists, but vibration determines position along the spectrum. You cannot eliminate cold, but you can increase heat. You cannot destroy fear, but you can elevate frequency beyond it. This understanding leads to freedom. The initiate no longer asks, "Why is this happening to me?" but instead asks, "What frequency am I currently holding, and what frequency is this experience responding to?" Responsibility replaces blame. From this perspective, suffering is not meaningless. It is feedback. It signals incoherent, imbalanced, or unresolved patterns. Pleasure, too, is feedback, not a reward, but resonance. Life becomes a conversation rather than a punishment. Practices of self-mastery always return to attention. Where attention goes, vibration follows. This is why distraction is not trivial. It fragments frequency. A scattered mind cannot sustain coherent vibration. Silence restores coherence. Rhythm stabilizes it. Intention directs it. Meditation, breath work, contemplative movement, and conscious speech are not spiritual decorations. They are vibrational technologies. Each refines frequency through repetition and awareness. Even language carries vibration. Words shape internal rhythm. This is why ancient traditions guarded sacred speech so carefully. What is spoken repeatedly becomes internal law. As vibration stabilizes, identity loosens. One realizes they are not their moods, reactions, or histories. They are the field within which these arise. This realization marks a turning point. From here, external chaos loses its authority. One may still experience pain, loss, or uncertainty, but they are no longer engulfed by it. The observer remains intact. This is inner sovereignty. The Hermetic initiate does not escape the world. They move within it deliberately, understanding that every encounter is an exchange of frequency. To walk into a room calmly is to shift its vibration. To respond with clarity is to alter momentum. To remain grounded is to anchor stability where none existed. This is quiet power. The principle of vibration thus reveals a hidden engine of all transformation. Mentalism explains creation. Correspondence explains reflection. But vibration explains movement, how one state becomes another. Nothing changes instantly. Frequency shifts gradually, then suddenly. This is why persistence matters more than intensity. Mastery is not dramatic. It is consistent. And when vibration is mastered, the initiate is no longer a prisoner of circumstance, nor a slave to emotion. They become a conscious participant in the unfolding of reality. With this, the third Hermetic principle completes its teaching. The illusion of opposites and the spectrum of reality. At first glance, the world appears divided, light and darkness, good and evil, love and fear, order and chaos. From childhood onward, we are taught to see reality in fragments, split into opposing camps locked in endless conflict. Yet Hermetic wisdom reveals a deeper truth. These opposites are not enemies. They are expressions of the same underlying force. This is the foundation of the principle of polarity. The ancient teaching states that everything has two poles, and that opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Heat and cold are not separate substances. They are varying intensities of temperature. Light and darkness are not rivals. Darkness is simply the absence of light. The difference lies not in essence, but in position along a spectrum. This principle dissolves the illusion of absolute division. Polarity teaches us that reality is not built from contradictions, but from gradients. Each condition flows into its apparent opposite through gradual transition. There is no sharp boundary where one becomes the other, only movement along a scale. This understanding transforms how we interpret experience. Fear and courage are not separate emotions. Courage is fear moved toward action rather than paralysis. Hate and love arise from the same emotional source, attachment. Even life and death are not opposites in conflict, but phases within a single continuous process of transformation. To the untrained mind, polarity appears as warfare. To the initiate, it is rhythm. This is why polarity cannot be eliminated. It must be understood. The Hermetic masters warned against attempting to destroy one pole in favor of another. Such efforts only strengthen the pendulum swing. Suppressing darkness does not create light. It drives shadow inward. Denying fear does not create peace. It fuels unconscious tension. Wisdom lies in navigation, not rejection. Polarity exists so that movement can occur. Without contrast, there is no perception. Without tension, there is no transformation. Creation itself depends on differentiation. The universe unfolds through contrast, but remains unified at its core. This principle applies not only to cosmic forces, but to the human psyche. Every thought exists in relation to its opposite. Every belief implies its contradiction. When one pole is embraced unconsciously, the other accumulates in the shadow. This is the source of inner conflict. The initiate learns to observe polarity without identifying with either extreme. They recognize that emotional states fluctuate, opinions shift, and identities dissolve over time. What remains constant is the awareness that witnesses the movement between poles. This awareness is neutral. From neutrality comes freedom. Rather than asking, which side is correct, the Hermetic path asks, where on the spectrum am I standing, and can I move deliberately? Polarity becomes a tool rather than a trap. Understanding this law reveals that most suffering arises not from circumstances, but from rigid attachment to one pole and resistance to its counterpart. Pain intensifies when we demand permanence in a world governed by flux. When this resistance is released, polarity transforms from conflict into guidance. Every challenge contains a solution in latent form. Every crisis signals a necessary shift along the spectrum. Every emotion carries information about imbalance or excess. Polarity speaks constantly, but only to those willing to listen without judgment. This is the gateway to emotional intelligence, spiritual maturity, and psychological integration. It teaches us that wholeness does not come from purity, but from range. To be human is to experience the full spectrum. To be conscious is to move within it skillfully. Emotion, identity, and the inner pendulum. Polarity is not only a cosmic principle, it is a psychological reality. Every emotion you experience exists because its opposite also exists. Joy is meaningful only because sorrow is possible. Confidence arises because doubt exists. Peace is recognized because turmoil has been known. Without contrast, experience collapses into neutrality and loses definition. This is why the emotional world behaves like a pendulum. Human feelings do not remain fixed. They swing between extremes, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. Love can turn into resentment. Passion can fade into indifference. Enthusiasm can collapse into exhaustion. These shifts are not failures. They are expressions of polarity in motion. Most suffering comes from misunderstanding this movement. When a person clings to a positive emotional state, fearing its loss, they unknowingly generate its opposite. The tighter the grip on pleasure, the stronger the rebound toward pain. Likewise, when someone resists a negative emotion, denying its presence, it grows in intensity beneath awareness. What we resist persists. Polarity teaches that emotions are not enemies to conquer, but signals to interpret. Each feeling marks a position on an internal spectrum. Awareness allows movement. Unconsciousness creates oscillation. This principle also governs identity. People often find themselves by choosing one pole and rejecting the other. Strong but not vulnerable, rational but not emotional, spiritual but not material. Yet every denied aspect does not disappear. It relocates to the shadow. The shadow is polarity denied. Carl Jung described the shadow as the repository of traits we refuse to acknowledge. Aggression suppressed becomes passive hostility. Vulnerability denied becomes emotional numbness. Spiritual pride often conceals fear of imperfection. Polarity demands integration, not exclusion. True strength includes softness. Authentic spirituality includes grounding. Wisdom includes doubt. When both poles are acknowledged, balance emerges naturally. This is why extreme identities collapse. Rigid moralism gives birth to hypocrisy. Excessive positivity breeds repression. Fanatical spirituality leads to escapism. These are not failures of intention, but consequences of polarity ignored. The Hermetic path does not ask you to choose sides. It teaches you to move consciously along the spectrum. This movement is governed by the law of vibration. By altering internal vibration, through attention, breath, and intention, one can shift emotional states without suppression or indulgence. This is emotional alchemy. Anger, for example, is not destroyed to create peace. It is refined. When its vibration is elevated, anger transforms into assertiveness. Assertiveness refined becomes clarity. Clarity stabilized becomes calm authority. The substance remains, only the degree changes. Fear follows the same pattern. At its lowest vibration, fear paralyzes. Elevated slightly, it becomes caution. Raised further, it becomes awareness. At higher levels, it becomes humility before the unknown. Polarity reveals that transformation is not about replacement. It is about transmutation. This understanding dissolves self-judgment. Instead of labeling emotions as good or bad, the initiate asks, what is this emotion pointing toward? Where is balance required? In this way, polarity becomes guidance rather than conflict. Life no longer appears as a battlefield between light and darkness, but as a training ground for balance. Challenges are no longer curses. They are invitations to reposition oneself along the spectrum. The wise do not avoid extremes. They pass through them without attachment. And it is here that mastery begins. Polarity in nature, energy, and the architecture of reality. Polarity is not an abstract spiritual metaphor. It is woven into the very structure of physical reality. At the most fundamental level of existence, nothing manifests without opposing forces. Matter itself is stabilized by polarity. Without it, form would collapse into chaos or dissolve into nothingness. Consider the atom. At its core, the atom is a living expression of polarity. Positively charged protons form the nucleus, creating a central force of attraction. Negatively charged electrons orbit this nucleus, generating motion, tension, and structure. If these opposing charges were not perfectly balanced, atoms could not exist. And without atoms, there will be no molecules, no matter, no life. Stability is born from opposition. This same principle governs electricity. Electric current flows only because of polarity. Positive and negative terminals create potential difference. Without opposition, there is no movement. Without movement, there is no energy transfer. Even magnetism operates on this law. Every magnet has a north and south pole. No matter how small the fragment, polarity remains intact. You cannot isolate one pole. Division only produces more pairs. This reveals a profound truth. Polarity is indivisible. Opposites are not separable. They are complementary expressions of the same force. This extends to electromagnetic waves, the foundation of light, radio, Wi-Fi, and all modern communication. These waves exist because electric and magnetic fields oscillate in opposition, generating propagation through space. Every digital signal you send, every image you view, every sound transmitted relies on polarity in motion. The invisible world is structured by opposites dancing in rhythm. Nature mirrors this law everywhere. Day and night regulate biological cycles. Expansion and contraction guide breath. Growth and decay sustain ecosystems. Even the seasons demonstrate polarity. Warmth ripens life. Cold restores balance. One prepares the ground for the other. Nothing in nature seeks permanence. Trees do not cling to leaves. Rivers do not resist evaporation. Animals do not mourn winter. They adapt. Humanity suffers because it forgets how to flow between poles. Polarity also governs perception. Light is visible only against darkness. Sound requires silence between vibrations. Motion is perceived only because stillness exists. Consciousness itself becomes aware through contrast. Self and other, known and unknown. Without polarity, awareness dissolves. Modern science continues to rediscover what Hermetic wisdom already understood. Quantum physics reveals that particles behave as both waves and matter, not one or the other, but both depending on observation. This duality is polarity expressed at the subatomic level. Energy condenses into form, then dissolves back into probability. Reality is not fixed, it oscillates. Even space and time are polar expressions. Expansion implies contraction. Entropy implies renewal. The universe itself breathes, expanding outward, then eventually returning inward. Ancient traditions describe this as the cosmic inhale and exhale. What appears as conflict is often equilibrium misunderstood. Human civilization, however, resists this law. It seeks endless growth without rest, constant pleasure without reflection, progress without integration. This imbalance creates systemic collapse, ecological, psychological, spiritual. Polarity ignored becomes destruction. Understanding polarity does not eliminate struggle, it reframes it. Opposition is not punishment, it is correction. When one force dominates, its opposite rises to restore balance. Excessive rigidity invites chaos. Excessive chaos demands structure. This is not failure. It is a universe self-regulating. This is why extreme systems collapse under their own weight. In personal life, polarity explains cycles of motivation and exhaustion, confidence and doubt, connection and solitude. Each phase carries information. Ignoring one side creates imbalance. Honoring both creates flow. Mastery is not found at the extremes. It is found at the center. The initiate learns to observe polarity without being consumed by it. They recognize that every experience carries its opposite within it, not as a threat, but as a hidden doorway. This understanding dissolves fear change. Because if opposites are degrees of the same thing, then transformation is not loss, it is movement. And movement is life, emotional alchemy, transmuting one pole into another. The true power of the principle of polarity is not merely understanding that opposites exist. It is realizing that movement between poles is possible. This is where Hermetic wisdom shifts from philosophy into practical alchemy. If love and fear are opposite ends of the same spectrum, then fear is not the enemy of love. It is love in a contracted state. Likewise, hatred is not the opposite of compassion in essence, but compassion distorted by pain and identification. Nothing needs to be destroyed. Everything can be transformed. This is one of the most radical insights of Hermeticism. You do not fight negative states. You transmute them. Most human suffering arises from the belief that emotions are fixed identities. I am angry. I am depressed. I am afraid. But Hermetic teaching reveals that emotions are not who you are. They are temporary positions on a spectrum. Just as temperature can be raised or lowered without changing the substance, emotional states can be shifted without denying their existence. Cold does not disappear when heat appears. It simply changes degree. Fear becomes courage not by suppression, but by movement. Sadness becomes wisdom not by denial, but by integration. Anger becomes clarity when its energy is redirected rather than resisted. This is emotional alchemy. Ancient Hermetic initiates were taught that all emotions are energy, and energy follows the law of vibration. Where vibration rises, polarity shifts. Where vibration stagnates, polarity hardens. This is why emotional repression leads to illness, not peace. Modern psychology unknowingly echoes this truth. When emotions are acknowledged, processed, and reframed, they lose destructive power. When they are suppressed, they intensify beneath awareness. The Hermetic path teaches conscious navigation of polarity. Imagine fear as energy moving inward, contracting awareness. Love is energy expanding outward, dissolving boundaries. The transition from one to the other does not require force. It requires awareness and redirection. The moment fear is observed without judgment, it loosens its grip. This is why observation itself is transformative. The initiate learns to stand between the poles, witnessing emotion without identification. From the center, movement becomes possible. One can deliberately elevate emotion through breath, posture, thought, and intention. This is not wishful thinking. It is energetic mechanics. Every emotion has a corresponding physical posture. Fear collapses the chest. Confidence opens it. Depression lowers gaze. Determination lifts it. By adjusting the body, the mind follows, polarity shifts. This principle explains ancient ritual postures, breathwork, mantra, and movement practices. These were not symbolic. They were technologies of transmutation. Sound also alters polarity. Words spoken with intention shift internal vibration. This is why mantras exist across cultures. Repeated sound alters emotional frequency, gradually moving consciousness along the spectrum. Even thought itself is a polarity tool. When one thought dominates awareness, it creates emotional gravity. Introducing an opposing thought does not create conflict. It restores balance. Gratitude dissolves resentment not by argument, but by reorientation. The mind cannot hold both extremes simultaneously. This is a hidden science behind affirmations, not blind positivity, but directional adjustment of mental energy. The initiate does not deny pain, they guide it. This ability separates the master from the unconscious individual. The unconscious person swings violently between poles, enslaved by circumstance. The conscious one moves deliberately, guided by understanding. They still feel sorrow, anger, fear, but they are not consumed by them. This is inner sovereignty. At a collective level, polarity explains cycles of history. Periods of oppression give rise to rebellion. Excessive freedom creates chaos, which invites order. Civilizations oscillate until integration is learned. Humanity has not yet mastered polarity. It swings. But the Aquarian age, as esoteric traditions suggest, is not about eliminating polarity. It is about becoming conscious within it. This is the next stage of evolution. Shadow and light, the polarity within consciousness. The most misunderstood application of polarity is found within the human psyche. People are taught to seek light and reject darkness, to purify, suppress, and eradicate what they deem negative. Yet Hermetic wisdom reveals a deeper truth. Light and shadow are not enemies. They are two expressions of the same consciousness, separated only by degree and awareness. Darkness is not evil. It is unintegrated potential. Shadow represents aspects of the self that have been denied, feared, or repressed. Light represents awareness, clarity, and conscious expression. But the shadow exists only because light exists. Without awareness, nothing would be hidden. This means the shadow is born from consciousness itself. Carl Jung, echoing ancient Hermetic insight, taught that the shadow is not the absence of goodness, but the presence of unacknowledged energy. What we reject externally often mirrors what we have not reconciled internally. This is polarity at work. Every trait contains its opposite within it. Strength hides vulnerability. Compassion hides anger. Wisdom hides doubt. The attempt to embody only one pole creates imbalance, and imbalance always demands correction. This is why forced positivity fractures the psyche. When individuals deny fear, it becomes anxiety. When they deny anger, it becomes resentment. When they deny grief, it becomes numbness. The rejected pole does not disappear. It returns through distortion. Integration is the path of mastery. Hermetic initiation does not aim to destroy the shadow. It seeks to illuminate it. When awareness enters darkness, polarity shifts naturally. Fear loses intensity when understood. Shame dissolves when brought into light. The shadow becomes an ally. This is why ancient initiations required descent before ascent. Myths across cultures tell of heroes entering underworlds, caves, labyrinths, symbolic representations of inner shadow. One cannot rise without first ascending. Light that has not known darkness is fragile. The polarity between ego and soul is another fundamental internal axis. The ego is not evil. It is a survival mechanism. It contracts identity to protect form. The soul expands identity to experience unity. When ego dominates, life becomes fear-driven. When soul dominates without grounding, life becomes disconnected. Balance is required. Spiritual bypassing occurs when individuals attempt to live only in soul energy, denying human limitation. Material obsession occurs when ego rules unchecked. Both are extremes. The initiate learns to mediate between these poles. This mediation creates wholeness. Consciousness matures not by choosing one side, but by holding both without collapse. This is the meaning behind the ancient symbol of the middle pillar, the point of equilibrium between forces. At the center, polarity becomes power. From this state, inner conflict dissolves. The need to judge fades. The world is no longer divided into good and bad, sacred and profane. Everything becomes information. This does not mean moral relativism. It means clarity. The shadow contains creative force. Many of history's greatest artists, thinkers, and mystics transmuted inner darkness into expression, wisdom, and compassion. Energy that is integrated becomes fuel. Energy that is suppressed becomes poison. Modern culture struggles because it externalizes polarity. Enemies are projected outward instead of reconciled inward. Wars are fought because internal conflicts are unresolved. The Hermetic path reverses this process. As within, so without. By integrating inner polarity, outer harmony increases. By reconciling personal shadow, collective shadow loses grip. This is why inner work is not selfish. It is planetary service. Time, destiny, and the illusion of fixed fate. One of the most liberating revelations of the law of polarity is its effect on how we understand time and destiny. Most people experience life as something that happens to them. Events appear fixed, unavoidable, written somewhere beyond reach. This perception arises because polarity is experienced unconsciously, as reaction rather than choice. Hermetic wisdom teaches something radically different. Destiny is not fixed, it oscillates. Every life unfolds along polar currents. Success and failure, clarity and confusion, expansion and contraction. These currents are not punishments or rewards. They are movements along a spectrum designed to generate awareness. When polarity is misunderstood, individuals believe they are trapped at one end of the scale. When polarity is understood, the initiate realizes movement along the scale is always possible. This is a secret hidden inside the phrase. Opposites are identical in nature, different only in degree. What you call misfortune is not a separate force from fortune. It is fortune at a lower vibration. What you call failure is success paused at another point on the same axis. The poles are not destinations. They are reference points. This understanding dissolves fatalism. Fate appears rigid only to those who live unconsciously. The more awareness increases, the more flexibility emerges. Consciousness acts like a slider along the spectrum, not a prisoner chained to one end. Ancient initiates understood that time itself is polarized. Past and future are not separate realities. They are opposing ends of the same continuum. The present moment is the balancing point, the fulcrum where polarity collapses into choice. This is why mastery always occurs now. Regret binds consciousness to the negative pole of the past. Anxiety binds it to the negative pole of the future. Presence dissolves both. At the center of polarity, the pendulum stops swinging. This is not poetic language. It is psychological and energetic truth. Trauma, for example, is not merely memory. It is consciousness stuck at one extreme of emotional polarity. Healing does not erase the past. It shifts one's position along the emotional spectrum until the charge neutralizes. The same applies to identity. People often define themselves by one pole. I am weak, I am unlucky, I am broken. These identities persist only because the opposite pole has not been consciously accessed. Strength, fortune, and wholeness already exist within the same continuum. Polarity guarantees this. The initiate learns to transmute, not escape. Transmutation is not denial. It is movement. You do not fight despair. You elevate its frequency until it becomes insight. You do not suppress fear. You refine it until it becomes awareness. This is alchemy of consciousness. Time loops repeat when polarity is resisted. Lessons return in new forms until equilibrium is achieved. This is why patterns recur in relationships, careers, and emotional life. The universe is not punishing, it is recalibrating. Once polarity is understood, repetition loses power. The initiate begins to recognize signals early, shifts direction sooner, and experiences fewer extremes. Life becomes smoother not because struggle disappears, but because resistance dissolves. The law does not remove challenge. It removes confusion. At advanced levels, polarity becomes a navigational instrument. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? The initiate asks, where on the spectrum of my position and where must I move? This shift transforms suffering into strategy. Destiny then becomes collaboration. You're no longer dragged by the pendulum. You ride it. This is why ancient texts say the wise are not exempt from pain, but they are exempt from bondage. They experience the swing, but they are not shattered by it. Polarity grants freedom not by eliminating extremes, but by revealing how to move between them. The Hermetic art of conscious polarization. At the heart of the law of polarity lies a secret practice known to initiates for millennia: conscious polarization. This is the point where philosophy becomes power. Most human beings move along the poles unconsciously. Their emotional states shift in response to external events. Praise lifts them. Criticism sinks them. Gain excites them. Loss devastates them. They are passengers on the pendulum, not its navigators. Hermetic mastery begins when this automatic movement is interrupted. Conscious polarization is a deliberate act of choosing one end of the spectrum and mentally relocating to it through focused awareness. This is not pretending. It is not positive thinking. It is energetic alignment. To understand this, recall the central Hermetic assertion: opposites are the same thing, differing only in degree. If this is true, and Hermeticism insists that it is, then moving from fear to courage is not a leap across realities. It is a shift along a single scale. The initiate does not attempt to destroy the negative pole. Destruction strengthens resistance. Instead, the initiate increases vibration along the same axis until the experience transforms. Consider anger. Anger and determination are not separate forces. They are variations of intensity within the same energetic current. When awareness rises, raw anger refines into resolve. When it rises further, resolve becomes disciplined power. When elevated again, power becomes leadership. The uninitiated suppress anger. The initiate transmutes it. This method applies to all internal states. Fear becomes alertness. Alertness becomes awareness. Awareness becomes intuition. Sadness becomes introspection. Introspection becomes wisdom. Desire becomes ambition. Ambition becomes purpose. Nothing is wasted. Everything is redirected. The technique itself is subtle but precise. It begins with recognition. The initiate first identifies the current emotional or mental state without judgment. Naming the state removes unconscious attachment. Next comes mapping the spectrum. One must consciously identify the opposite pole. If despair is present, hope must be acknowledged as existing on the same continuum. If confusion dominates, clarity is its counterpart. Then comes a decisive act, gradual elevation. Hermeticism warns against sudden leaps. Attempting to jump instantly from one extreme to the other often results in backlash. The pendulum responds with equal force. Instead, movement must be incremental. This is achieved through imagery, breath, posture, and internal dialogue. The initiate visualizes ascending degrees, not endpoints. Each small shift weakens the grip of the lower pole. This process mirrors physical training. Muscles grow through progressive resistance, not sudden overload. Consciousness follows the same law. Advanced practitioners learn to recognize polarity even in thoughts. Every thought has a polarity. A belief in limitation implies the existence of expansion. A thought of unworthiness implies worthiness. By identifying polarity embedded within the thought, the initiate dissolves its authority. This is why Hermetic teachings emphasize mental discipline above ritual. Ritual without awareness is theater. Awareness without ritual is power. Over time, conscious polarization produces remarkable effects. Emotional stability increases. Reactivity decreases. External events lose their power to dictate internal states. The initiate becomes internally governed. This does not create emotional numbness. On the contrary, sensitivity increases. But sensitivity is no longer synonymous with fragility. The initiate feels fully, yet chooses response deliberately. This is the difference between being alive and being enslaved by life. Eventually, polarization becomes instantaneous. Awareness itself becomes sufficient to shift states. The initiate no longer needs technique. Presence becomes a technique. At this level, polarity ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a tool. The world may still swing between extremes, but the initiate stands at the axis. Here lies the true meaning of balance, not stagnation, but mastery of movement. Polarity within the unified Hermetic system. To understand polarity fully, it must be removed from isolation and placed back into the living architecture of Hermetic law. No Hermetic principle exists alone. Each law interlocks with the others like gears in a cosmic mechanism. When one moves, all move. Polarity, in truth, is not an independent force. It is a visible expression of deeper laws already at work. First, polarity is inseparable from mentalism. Because the universe is mental, polarity itself is a condition of consciousness. Opposites do not exist independently in the external world. They exist as perceptions structured by mind. Hot and cold, good and evil, success and failure are distinctions created through mental interpretation. Remove consciousness, and polarity dissolves into undifferentiated being. This means the battleground polarity is not the world. It is the mind. Every polarity you experience externally first exists internally. The conflict between hope and despair, courage and fear, clarity and confusion begins as a mental division. Change the mental position and the polarity reorganizes. This is why Hermetic training always begins with mental mastery. Without it, polarity enslaves. With it, polarity serves. Second, polarity is governed by vibration. Poles do not oppose each other. They oscillate along a vibrational spectrum. What you experience as low or high is not a difference in kind, but in frequency. Fear vibrates slower than courage. Ignorance vibrates slower than insight. Hatred vibrates slower than compassion. Thus, vibration is the engine that moves polarity. When vibration rises, consciousness slides naturally toward constructive pole. When vibration falls, consciousness drifts toward contraction and limitation. This is why emotional states change without explanation. Vibration is shifting beneath awareness. The initiate does not fight polarity. They raise vibration. This is also why environments matter. Music, language, imagery, posture, breath, all influence vibration. The initiate curates their environment not out of superstition, but precision. Third, polarity is stabilized through rhythm. Rhythm governs the swing of the pendulum. It ensures that every movement toward one pole generates momentum toward the other. Without understanding rhythm, polarity mastery remains incomplete. Most suffering occurs not because polarity exists, but because humans resist rhythmic return. They cling to pleasure and panic during pain. This resistance amplifies the swing. Hermetic wisdom teaches neutralization. Neutralization does not mean indifference. It means conscious positioning at the midpoint of oscillation. From this center, the pendulum loses leverage. The swing still occurs, but it weakens. This is how masters remain calm in chaos and grounded in success. They feel the motion without being carried by it. Polarity also prepares the mind for cause and effect. Every cause is born from a polar position. Every action arises from alignment with one pole over another. Conscious polarization ensures that causes are planted intentionally rather than impulsively. Finally, polarity resolves in gender. Masculine and feminine forces are themselves polar expressions of creation. One projects, one receives, one initiates, one transforms. Neither dominates without imbalance. True creation occurs only when polarity harmonizes. Thus, polarity is not a flaw of existence. It is the engine of manifestation. Without polarity, nothing would move. Without movement, nothing would exist. Without existence, consciousness could not know itself. The initiate, therefore, does not seek to escape polarity. They learn to ride it, refine it, and ultimately transcend identification with it. This is the silent victory of Hermetic wisdom. When polarity is mastered, the soul no longer asks, "Which side am I on?" It asks, "What degree serves evolution now?" And in that question, freedom begins. The pendulum that governs all things. Nothing in existence is still. Nothing remains fixed. Everything moves, not randomly, but according to a precise and eternal cadence. This is the foundation of the fifth Hermetic law, the principle of rhythm. Hermes Trismegistus taught that all things rise and fall, advance and retreat, expand and contract. This motion is not chaos. It is order in motion, a cosmic breathing that sustains the universe itself. Where polarity reveals the existence of opposites, rhythm explains why consciousness is repeatedly pulled between them. Rhythm is the law that governs the swing of the pendulum. Every force that moves in one direction gathers momentum, and that momentum must eventually be balanced by a return movement. Joy gives way to sorrow. Growth is followed by rest. Civilizations rise, peak, and decline. Even stars are born, burn, and collapse back into the cosmic womb. This oscillation is not punishment. It is equilibrium. In the Hermetic worldview, the universe is self-correcting. Rhythm acts as the invisible regulator that prevents excess. When any system pushes too far toward one extreme, the pendulum swings back with equal force toward the other. This is why permanence is an illusion. Human suffering often arises not from rhythm itself, but from ignorance of it. People cling to moments of pleasure, believing they should last forever. They resist moments of hardship, believing they should not exist. In doing so, they place themselves directly in the path of the pendulum's force. The initiate, however, learns to recognize the swing before it reaches its extreme. This awareness changes everything. Consider the tides of the ocean. No sailor curses the sea for rising and falling. They learn the patterns, read the signs, and navigate accordingly. In the same way, rhythm governs emotional states, mental clarity, creative power, and even spiritual perception. There are times when the mind ascends, inspiration flows, intuition sharpens, purpose feels clear. And there are times when the mind descends, confusion arises, energy fades, doubt appears. Both movements are natural. Neither defines the soul. The mistake lies in identification. Hermetic wisdom teaches that you are not the swing. You are the observer of the swing. By positioning consciousness at the center rather than the extremes, one reduces the violent impact of oscillation. The pendulum still moves, but it loses control. This is the first secret of rhythm mastery, non-identification. To observe joy without clinging, to observe pain without drowning, to move with cycles rather than against them. This principle explains why the same effort sometimes succeeds and sometimes fails, why motivation appears and disappears, why clarity alternates with confusion. These are not flaws in character. They are rhythmic fluctuations of energy and awareness. Ancient initiates aligned their lives with rhythm. They knew when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent. Timing, not force, was their power. Rhythm also governs history. Empires rise during expansive phases and collapse during contracting ones. The wise do not mourn decline blindly. They prepare for renewal. In the human body, rhythm manifests as heartbeat, breath, sleep cycles, hormonal tides. In the psyche, It appears as emotional waves. In the soul, it reveals itself as periods of awakening followed by integration. Nothing grows without rest. Nothing ascends without return. This law does not exist to trap consciousness. It exists to teach balance. And once balance is understood, mastery becomes possible. The emotional pendulum and inner cycles. The most immediate place where the law of rhythm reveals itself is within the human emotional world. Every feeling you experience is subject to oscillation. No emotional state remains fixed, no matter how intense it feels in the moment. Joy rises, joy falls, confidence peaks, confidence wanes, hope expands, hope contracts. This movement is not psychological weakness. It is universal law. Hermetic wisdom teaches that emotions are not random reactions to life, but rhythmic expressions of energy moving through consciousness. Just as the tide does not ask permission to rise or fall, emotions follow their own cycles. The danger arises when identity attaches itself to one pole of the pendulum. When joy appears, the ego whispers, "This is who I am." When sorrow arrives, it cries, "This will never end." Both statements are illusions. Rhythm ensures that every emotional extreme contains the seed of its opposite. Excessive enthusiasm often precedes exhaustion. Deep sorrow often precedes clarity. The pendulum does not discriminate. It balances. Most suffering is not caused by pain itself, but by resistance to its rhythmic nature. The initiate learns a radical truth. Emotions are weather, not self. You do not curse the sky for rain. You do not cling to the sun, demanding it never set. You observe, adapt, and move accordingly. Emotional mastery begins when the same approach is applied inwardly. Hermes taught that the pendulum swings between feeling states, but the center remains still. The center is consciousness. When awareness observes emotion without merging with it, the amplitude of the swing weakens. The highs become less intoxicating, the lows less devastating. This does not produce numbness. It produces stability. The untrained mind rides a pendulum like a passenger thrown between extremes. The trained mind stands at the axis, watching motion without being carried away. This is why spiritual traditions emphasize presence. Presence interrupts momentum. Consider anger. Anger rarely appears without warning. It builds rhythmically: irritation, tension, acceleration, explosion. When awareness enters early in the cycle, the swing is reduced. When awareness arrives late, the pendulum completes its arc. The same applies to sadness, fear, excitement, and desire. The law of rhythm does not demand suppression. Suppression creates internal pressure that intensifies the rebound. Instead, it teaches observation without attachment. This is the middle path spoken of in many traditions. Not emotional denial, but emotional sovereignty. The Hermetic initiate learns to anticipate cycles. They recognize that after intense productivity comes fatigue, after social immersion comes solitude, after spiritual insight comes grounding. Instead of resisting the downward swing, they use it for integration. Instead of clinging to the upward swing, they use it for creation. This wisdom transforms emotional life from chaos into choreography. Even depression, when viewed through this lens, is not a permanent identity, but a descending phase demanding rest, reflection, or recalibration. When ignored or fought, it deepens. When listened to wisely, it passes. The law of rhythm reveals why forcing constant positivity is destructive. It attempts to freeze the pendulum at one extreme, an impossible task that guarantees violent recoil. Balance does not mean staying high. Balance means remaining centered while movement continues. This understanding grants emotional freedom. You no longer fear sadness because you know its return swing is inevitable. You no longer worship joy because you know its descent is natural. You no longer panic at inner darkness because you recognize it as part of the cycle. The pendulum moves, but you are not the pendulum. The law of compensation and neutralization, closely intertwined the principle of rhythm, is a deeper and often misunderstood law. The law of compensation. This law explains why every movement to one extreme is met with an equal movement toward the opposite extreme. Rhythm is the motion. Compensation is the balancing force behind it. Hermetic teachings state, the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Nothing in the universe is allowed excess without correction. When pleasure is intensified beyond equilibrium, compensation appears as fatigue, emptiness, or pain. When suffering deepens beyond balance, compensation eventually manifests as relief, insight, or renewal. This is not punishment. It is cosmic accounting. The universe is not moral. It is mathematical. Every gain carries a cost. Every loss carries a return. Every expansion is followed by contraction. This law governs not only emotions, but wealth, health, power, relationships, and even civilizations. History itself swings rhythmically. Empires rise with momentum, confidence, and abundance. At their peak, imbalance appears. Excess, arrogance, stagnation. Compensation follows. Decline, fragmentation, collapse. Then the cycle renews. The same law operates within individual lives. Someone who lives in constant indulgence eventually pays through exhaustion or dissatisfaction. Someone who endures long hardship often develops depth, resilience, or wisdom that later becomes a source of strength. Hermeticism teaches that suffering is not random, nor is pleasure permanent. Both are movements of the same pendulum. However, and this is the crucial teaching, the initiate is not powerless before this law. While the masses are carried unconsciously by compensation, the trained mind learns neutralization. Neutralization does not stop rhythm. Nothing can, but it reduces its extremes. How? By withdrawing emotional identification. When you emotionally cling to pleasure, compensation intensifies. When you emotionally resist pain, compensation deepens. But when you observe both states with calm awareness, the pendulum loses momentum. This is why ancient sages cultivated detachment, not indifference, but non-attachment. The initiate learns to enjoy pleasure without addiction and endure pain without despair. This balanced engagement weakens the compensatory backlash. Think of a pendulum clock. If you grab the pendulum mid-swing, it slows. Awareness acts in the same way. This is a hidden meaning behind many spiritual teachings that emphasize equanimity. Buddhism calls it non-attachment. Stoicism calls it inner tranquility. Hermeticism calls it mastery of rhythm. The goal is not emotional flatness. That is lifelessness. The goal is measured motion. Consider wealth. Sudden riches often bring instability, fear, and loss because the internal rhythm is unprepared. Slow, conscious accumulation allows integration, minimizing compensatory collapse. Consider spiritual awakening. Sudden, ungrounded insight often leads to confusion or ego inflation. Balanced integration produces lasting clarity. Compensation ensures that anything gained without balance will be paid for elsewhere. But the master understands something profound. Compensation can be prepaid. Through discipline, humility, and self-awareness, imbalance is corrected early, preventing violent correction later. This is the essence of wisdom. When you live consciously, compensation becomes gentle rather than brutal. The Hermetic initiate does not seek to escape rhythm, but to ride it skillfully. Like a sailor who cannot stop the ocean, but learns to read its tides. Once this law is understood, blame dissolves. You stop accusing life of cruelty. You stop demanding permanence from pleasure. You stop fearing loss as annihilation. Instead, you see life as oscillation guided by intelligence. And within that oscillation, you learn to stand still, living in alignment with cycles. To truly master the principle of rhythm, one must move beyond understanding and into alignment. Knowledge alone does not free, application does. Rhythm governs all life, but suffering arises when we move against it rather than with it. Nature never resists its own cycles. Winter does not argue with cold. Night does not complain about darkness. The ocean does not cling to high tide. Yet humans often attempt to deny rhythm, demanding constant productivity, permanent happiness, uninterrupted success. This resistance creates friction, and friction creates pain. Hermetic wisdom teaches that peace comes not from controlling cycles, but from cooperating with them. Every cycle has 3 phases: expansion, peak, contraction. Most people only enjoy expansion and panic during contraction. The initiate understands that contraction is not failure. It is integration. After effort comes rest. After learning comes assimilation. After action comes silence. When you ignore contraction, burnout follows. When you honor it, strength returns. This principle applies directly to creativity. Artists experience periods of inspiration followed by emptiness. If the emptiness is resisted, creativity dries up. If it is accepted, a deeper wave follows. It applies to work. Continuous pushing leads to collapse. Strategic retreat restores clarity and power. It applies to emotions. Grief allowed to flow passes naturally. Grief suppressed becomes chronic. The Hermetic path teaches timing, knowing when to act and when to wait. Ancient initiates planned their work according to cycles of the moon, seasons, and even planetary movements. While modern life has forgotten these rhythms, the body has not. Your energy rises and falls daily. Your focus sharpens and dulls. Your motivation comes in waves. To live wisely is to observe these patterns and plan accordingly. Work deeply when energy is high. Reflect when energy is low. Do not force inspiration. Do not judge rest. This awareness transforms rhythm from an enemy into an ally. One of the most powerful practices for aligning with rhythm is stillness. Stillness does not oppose motion. It anchors it. When you pause consciously, you step outside the pendulum momentarily. This is why meditation, prayer, silence, and solitude are emphasized across spiritual traditions. They return you to the center point. At the center, rhythm continues, but it no longer controls you. This is a state of the master, emotionally engaged, yet inwardly steady, active yet unshaken, responsive yet grounded. The initiate experiences joy without losing themselves in it, and sorrow without drowning in it. This balance is not suppression. It is sovereignty. When life rises, you rise with gratitude. When life falls, you fall with trust. Both movements serve growth. The principle of rhythm ultimately teaches humility. No state lasts. No condition defines you. Everything moves, except awareness itself. You are not the wave. You are the ocean watching the wave. Once this is realized, fear diminishes. You stop clinging to moments. You stop resisting transitions. You begin to live in season with existence. Rhythm becomes guidance rather than chaos. And from this harmony, true wisdom emerges. The universe has no accidents. Imagine existence as an immense, invisible web. Every thread connected, every movement rippling outward with absolute precision. In such a universe, nothing happens randomly. No thought, no action, no encounter is isolated. This is a foundation of the principle of cause and effect, the sixth Hermetic law. The ancient teaching states it plainly. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. What humanity often calls chance, luck, or fate is simply the result of causes too complex, subtle, or hidden to be immediately perceived. Rain does not fall by accident. Seeds do not sprout without conditions. Lives do not unfold without prior momentum. To the untrained mind, life appears chaotic. To the Hermetic initiate, life is lawful. This principle dismantles the illusion of randomness and replaces it with responsibility. Not blame, but awareness. Every experience you encounter is an effect. Every effect originates from a cause. And many of those causes were planted long before the effect appeared. This realization is both unsettling and liberating. Unsettling, because it removes the comfort of victimhood. Liberating, because it reveals that change is possible at the level of cause. Most people live exclusively at the level of effects. They react, they complain, they celebrate or suffer without understanding why. When something bad happens, they ask, why me? When something good happens, they call it luck. Hermetic wisdom invites a deeper question. What causes set this event in motion? The law of cause and effect operates on multiple planes simultaneously: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. A visible event may have an invisible origin. A present circumstance may be rooted in a long-forgotten thought, habit, or belief. A spoken word can spark conflict. A repeated thought can shape destiny. A single decision can alter a lifetime. Nothing appears fully formed. Everything emerges through sequence. Consider a storm. To a casual observer, it arrives suddenly. To a meteorologist, it is a result of pressure systems, temperature shifts, humidity, and time. The storm was inevitable once conditions aligned. Human lives function the same way. Success is not sudden. Failure is not random. Transformation is not magic. They are outcomes of accumulated causes. This principle does not suggest fatalism. It does not claim that your future is fixed. On the contrary, it teaches that by becoming conscious of causes, you gain power over effects. The unaware are pushed by forces they do not see. The aware begin to steer. Hermes Trismegistus taught that true mastery lies in rising above blind causality, not by escaping the law, but by using it consciously. To do this, one must first recognize a difficult truth. If your life feels repetitive, the causes are repetitive. If your results feel stagnant, the causes lack movement. If your suffering repeats, the lesson remains unlearned. This is not punishment. It is instruction. Life teaches through consequence. In this light, cause and effect becomes not a cold mechanism, but a cosmic teacher, patient, precise, and impartial. Nothing is withheld. Nothing is arbitrary. Everything is responding. The moment you understand this, a quiet shift occurs. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what is this showing me? That shift marks the beginning of mastery, the hidden levels of causation. To truly understand the principle of cause and effect, we must abandon the idea that causality exists only in the physical world. What we see with our eyes is merely the final stage of a much deeper process. Hermetic wisdom teaches that causes are born on higher planes long before they descend into visible form. Most people believe causes are physical. An action produces a reaction. A collision produces damage. A decision produces a result. This is true, but incomplete. In Hermetic philosophy, reality unfolds across multiple planes: the mental, the emotional, and the physical. What appears last is a physical effect. What appears first is the mental cause. A thought is not nothing. An emotion is not harmless. An intention is not abstract. They are forces. A single thought, repeated often enough, becomes a belief. A belief shapes perception. Perception guides action. Action produces consequence. By the time an effect manifests physically, the original cause may be forgotten, but it has not disappeared. This is why many people feel confused by their lives. They experience outcomes they do not remember choosing. In truth, they chose unconsciously. Hermetic teachings explain that there are two kinds of people in relation to this law: those who are cause and those who cause. The cause live reactively. Their emotions are triggered by circumstances. Their choices are dictated by habit, fear, or social pressure. They move like leaves in the wind, believing external forces control their destiny. The causal live deliberately. They observe their inner world. They understand that thoughts generate momentum. They choose responses instead of reacting automatically. They plant causes with awareness. The difference is not intelligence. It is consciousness. Consider anger. Anger does not erupt spontaneously. It emerges from interpretation, memory, identity, and expectation. The event is not the cause. The meaning assigned to the event is. Two people experience the same situation. One grows bitter. The other grows wiser. The event is identical. The causes are not. This is the hidden dimension of causality. The Kybalion teaches that masters rise above the plane of effect by operating on the plane of cause. They do not deny circumstances. They do not resist reality. Instead, they shape the invisible currents that later become reality. This is why spiritual traditions emphasize vigilance of thought. Buddha taught, what we are is a result of what we have thought. Modern psychology confirms this truth under different language. The subconscious mind stores patterns, beliefs, and emotional reactions. These patterns operate automatically, producing repeated outcomes until they are brought into awareness. Unseen causes create visible cycles. If relationships repeat the same pain, the cause lies within. If opportunities dissolve, the cause lies within. If peace feels unreachable, the cause lies within. This does not mean self-blame. It means self-access. When you recognize the internal origin of causes, you gain the ability to interrupt them. A conscious pause breaks a chain. A new interpretation alters direction. A deliberate choice plants a new seed. The physical world responds slowly but faithfully. The law never rushes. The law never forgets. Every cause must express itself, but you choose which causes you generate. This is a quiet power hidden inside the principle of cause and effect. Karma, the long memory of the universe. When the principle of cause and effect is extended beyond a single moment or lifetime, it is known across spiritual traditions as karma. Contrary to popular belief, karma is not a system of reward and punishment. It is not a moral scoreboard. It is simply cause and effect operating across time. The universe remembers. Every thought carries momentum. Every action leaves an imprint. Every intention shapes a trajectory. Karma is the total accumulation of these imprints, unfolding not always immediately, but inevitably. Some causes produce instant effects. Touch fire and you are burned. Others move slowly, ripening across years, relationships, or even lifetimes. Hermetic philosophy teaches that time does not erase causes. It only delays their appearance. This explains why life often feels unjust to the untrained mind. Why do good people suffer? Why do harmful individuals prosper for a time? Why do some struggles appear inherited, not chosen? Because causality does not obey human timelines. The Hermetic sages taught that effects return when conditions are correct, not when the ego demands fairness. Just as a seed germinates only when soil, water, and sunlight align, karmic causes wait for the proper moment to unfold. This understanding dissolves resentment and replaces it with clarity. Suffering is not random. Joy is not accidental. Both are instructors. Karma functions as education, not punishment. A soul that misuses power may later experience powerlessness, not as revenge, but as understanding. A soul that avoided responsibility may later be placed in situations where responsibility is unavoidable. The lesson continues until comprehension is achieved. This is why patterns repeat. The same emotional pain reappears with different faces. The same conflicts emerge in new forms. The same obstacles block progress. Life is asking the same question again, but louder. From the Hermetic perspective, awareness is the only true liberation from karmic cycles. Once a cause is seen clearly, it can no longer operate unconsciously. This is why self-knowledge is sacred. The Kybalion teaches that the wise do not resist effects. They neutralize causes. They observe life not as victims, but as students of law. When an unwanted effect appears, they trace it inward and backward, asking, what belief produced this? What fear sustained it? What habit reinforced it? Through this inquiry, karma loses its grip. Importantly, karma does not negate free will. It responds to it. Every moment offers a chance to generate new causes that can soften, redirect, or dissolve older ones. Compassion creates gentler outcomes. Awareness weakens repetition. Intentional action reshapes destiny. Even ancient burdens can be transformed through present understanding. This is why spiritual mastery is not about escaping the world, but engaging it consciously. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to plant causes aligned with clarity, balance, and truth. The universe does not judge. It responds. Once this is understood, life stops feeling hostile. It becomes instructive. Every challenge becomes a message. Every success becomes a responsibility. Every moment becomes causative. You are not trapped by the past. You are responding to it and shaping the future simultaneously. From victim to architect, mastery of causation. The greatest misunderstanding about the law of cause and effect is the belief that it imprisons us. In truth, it liberates, but only when understood. Most people live as effects. They react to circumstances. They respond to pressure. They blame fate, society, luck, or others. In Hermetic terms, they are leaves moved by unseen winds. The initiate, however, learns to move up the chain of causation. Hermes taught that there are levels of cause. The physical world is the lowest level, where effects become visible. Above it lies the mental plane, where thoughts and beliefs generate patterns. Higher still is the spiritual plane, where intention and awareness originate. Those who act only on the physical level are constantly reacting. Those who act on the mental level begin to shape outcomes. Those who act on the spiritual level set the direction of reality itself. This is a distinction between being ruled by events and ruling one's response to events. The master does not deny the law. They use it. They understand that every word spoken is a cause. Every emotion sustained is a cause. Every repeated thought is a cause. And cause is compound. A single fearful thought means little. Fear repeated daily becomes identity. Identity sustained becomes destiny. This is why Hermetic training emphasizes mental discipline above all else. Before one can change the world, one must regulate the mind that generates causes unconsciously. Franz Bardon wrote that the magician's first task is not ritual, symbols, or invocation. It is self-mastery. Without control of thought and emotion, power only accelerates chaos. True mastery is subtle. It is choosing silence instead of reaction, choosing intention instead of impulse, choosing patience instead of force. These choices may seem small, but they alter the causal chain at its source. Consider anger. Anger itself is an effect produced by interpretation. If you change the interpretation, the anger never forms. The effect dissolves before it manifests. This is causal intervention. Likewise, fear creates contraction. Contraction creates avoidance. Avoidance creates stagnation. By addressing fear directly at the mental level, the entire chain collapses. This is why awareness is power. The master sees future consequences in present thoughts. They know that nothing is neutral. Even inaction is a cause. But mastery does not mean controlling everything externally. It means aligning with law, not fighting it. You cannot violate cause and effect, but you can position yourself upstream. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the master asks, "What is this teaching me about the causes I am generating?" Life becomes feedback, not punishment. Once this perspective stabilizes, anxiety fades. Regret loses its sting. The future becomes flexible rather than threatening. The individual is no longer dragged by the pendulum of fate. They ride it consciously. This does not make life effortless, but it makes it meaningful. Every action becomes deliberate. Every challenge becomes navigational. Every moment becomes creative. At this level, destiny is no longer a mystery. It is a continuum of causes under observation. Freedom within the law. At first glance, the law of cause and effect appears rigid, even unforgiving. If every action produces an inevitable result, where is freedom? Where is choice? Where is grace? Hermetic wisdom answers clearly. Freedom does not exist outside the law. It exists within it. The mistake most people make is believing that freedom means the absence of consequences. In reality, freedom is the ability to choose causes consciously, fully aware of their effects. A child touches fire and is burned. There is no injustice in this. The law acts neutrally. An adult, having learned, chooses not to touch the fire. That is freedom born of understanding. So it is with life. The more unconscious a person is, the more mechanical their existence becomes. They repeat inherited beliefs, emotional reactions, and social conditioning. Their future is predictable because their causes are repetitive. The more conscious a person becomes, the more options appear. This is why Hermetic texts say that the wise obey the law, while the unwise are broken by it. The initiate does not attempt to escape karma. They refine it. They understand that causes are not limited to dramatic actions. Tone of thought matters. Emotional states matter. Attention matters. Where attention goes, energy follows. Where energy flows, structure forms. Where structure forms, experience appears. This is causation at its most subtle level. The initiate therefore trains awareness like a craftsman sharpens tools. They observe inner states without immediately identifying with them. They intervene early, before thought becomes emotion, before emotion becomes action. This is how freedom expands. At this stage, the individual realizes something profound. Most suffering is delayed causation. The pain of today often originates in forgotten choices, unresolved emotions, or long-held beliefs formed years earlier. This understanding removes resentment. It replaces blame with responsibility, not as burden, but as power. Responsibility means responsibility, the ability to respond rather than react. Even when faced with consequences from past causes, the initiate retains freedom in how they meet the effect. A painful event can become bitterness or wisdom. The external effect may be fixed, but the internal response generates new causes immediately. Thus, every moment contains two timelines, the effect arriving from the past, the cause being planted for the future. The master lives primarily in the second. This is why Hermetic teachings emphasize patience. Effects do not always arrive immediately. Seeds take time. Many abandon disciplined thought because results do not appear quickly. They forget that causation operates across cycles, not impulses. But those who persist inevitably see alignment emerge. Opportunities appear where none existed. Patterns soften. Resistance dissolves. Not because the law changed, but because the individual changed position within it. Ultimately, the law of cause and effect teaches humility and empowerment simultaneously. Nothing happens without reason, and nothing is beyond transformation. You are neither a victim of fate nor an all-powerful God. You are a participant in an intelligent system. To know this law is to step out of superstition. To apply it is to step into mastery. And when cause is chosen consciously, effect becomes an ally rather than a threat. The creative duality of the universe. Imagine creation not as a single force, but as a conversation, a continuous exchange between two complementary principles that exist within everything. This is the essence of the principle of gender, the seventh and final Hermetic law. Hermetic wisdom teaches that gender is not merely biological. It is not limited to male and female bodies, nor to social roles or identities. Instead, gender is a universal creative polarity, present in all planes of existence, physical, mental, and spiritual. Every act of creation requires two forces, one that initiates, one that receives, gestates, and gives form. These are what Hermeticists call the masculine and feminine principles. The masculine principle is expansive. It projects, penetrates, directs, and activates. It is the spark, the idea, the impulse of will. Without it, nothing begins. The feminine principle is receptive. It absorbs, nurtures, organizes, and manifests. It is the womb of creation, transforming potential into reality. Without it, nothing becomes. Neither is superior. Neither is complete alone. Creation only occurs where these two principles meet in harmony. This law operates everywhere. In nature, it appears in seed and soil, pollen and ovum, sunlight and earth. In the mind, it appears as idea and imagination, intention and feeling, focus and intuition. In the spiritual realm, it appears as divine impulse and creative intelligence. Modern misunderstanding often reduces gender to conflict, dominance versus submission, strength versus softness. Hermetic wisdom reveals the opposite. True power emerges from balance. An excess of masculine energy leads to rigidity, aggression, domination, and burnout. An excess of feminine energy leads to passivity, emotional overwhelm, and lack of direction. The universe avoids both extremes. Galaxies form because expansion meets containment. Life emerges because impulse meets receptivity. Thought becomes reality because will meets imagination. Even consciousness itself follows this law. Awareness, masculine, observes experience, while the subconscious, feminine, receives, records, and manifests. This explains why pure logic without intuition becomes sterile, and intuition without structure becomes chaotic. The Hermetic initiate learns not to favor one principle over the other, but to marry them internally. This inner union is what alchemists symbolize as a sacred marriage, the union of king and queen, sun and moon, fire and water. Before we explore how these energies function within the mind, the body, and the soul, one truth must be clearly understood. You already contain both principles. Your life reflects how well they cooperate. And until they are balanced within you, creation remains incomplete. The masculine principle, force, direction, and will. The masculine principle is the force of initiation. It is the current that moves outward, the will that decides, the fire that begins motion. In Hermetic philosophy, masculine energy is not defined by physical gender. It exists equally within men and women, within every conscious being. Where the feminine holds potential, the masculine activates it. This principle governs action, logic, focus, structure, direction, decision, It is the energy that says, I will, and follows through. In the universe, masculine energy appears as radiation, expansion, and projection. The sun emitting light is a masculine act. Lightning striking the earth is masculine. The first impulse that begins any process belongs to this principle. Within the human mind, masculine energy expresses itself as reason and intention. It is the ability to define goals, make choices, and move toward outcomes. It gives shape to chaos and order to imagination. This energy is essential for manifestation. Without it, ideas remain dreams, visions remain fantasies, and intuition never becomes action. In psychological terms, the masculine principle is associated with clarity and discernment. It separates, analyzes, and defines. It creates boundaries and establishes identity. It asks what, how, and when. Carl Jung described aspects of this energy through archetypes such as the warrior, who acts with courage and discipline, the king, who provides order, responsibility, and stability, the magician, who applies knowledge with precision, the lover, who channels passion into purposeful connection. When balanced, masculine energy produces confidence without arrogance, leadership without tyranny, and strength without cruelty. It protects rather than dominates. It serves rather than controls. However, imbalance distorts this power. When masculine energy becomes excessive, it hardens. The individual seeks domination instead of cooperation. Logic suppresses emotion. Control replaces wisdom. Life becomes a battlefield rather than a creation. This imbalance appears as obsession with power, fear of vulnerability, inability to listen, constant competition, emotional suppression. On the other extreme, when masculine energy is deficient, potential collapses inward. There's indecision, passivity, and avoidance. The individual knows what they want, but lacks the will to act. Purpose dissolves into procrastination. Without masculine direction, feminine creativity has nowhere to go. Hermetic teaching does not call for rejection of masculine energy. It calls for its refinement. Fire must be controlled to warm, not to destroy. A sword must be guided to protect, not to wound. The initiate learns that true masculine power is not force imposed on the world, but self-mastery. Discipline, when aligned with wisdom, becomes freedom. Action guided by awareness becomes creation. And yet, the masculine principle alone cannot complete the work. For every spark, there must be a womb. For every intention, a space to receive it. The feminine principle, receptivity, intuition, and creation. If the masculine principle is the spark, the feminine principle is the womb. In Hermetic philosophy, the feminine is not passive weakness. It is creative intelligence. It is a space that receives, transforms, and gives form. Without it, no creation can occur, no matter how powerful the initiating force may be. The feminine principle governs receptivity, intuition, gestation, emotion, imagination, transformation. It is a silent force behind all becoming. Where masculine energy moves outward, the feminine moves inward. Where masculine defines, the feminine unifies. Where masculine acts, the feminine allows, and in allowing it creates. In nature, feminine energy is seen in the earth that receives the seed, the ocean that shapes the shoreline, the night sky that holds the stars. It is present in cycles, rhythms, and tides. The moon, with its phases of growth and retreat, is the ancient symbol of this principle. Within the human being, feminine energy expresses itself as intuition, sensitivity, empathy, and inner vision. It is the ability to feel truth rather than calculate it. It perceives patterns before logic can explain them. This energy is deeply connected to the subconscious mind, the vast inner world where symbols, emotions, memories, and archetypes reside. Creation does not happen through force here. It happens through resonance. The feminine does not push reality into shape. It draws it forth. In Jungian psychology, this principle appears through archetypes such as the mother, the nurturer and protector of life, the maiden, the energy of renewal, curiosity, and possibility, the queen, sovereign wisdom guided by compassion, the crone, keeper of hidden knowledge and deep intuition. These archetypes reflect stages of creative power, not weakness. Feminine energy governs birth, growth, decay, and renewal, the eternal cycle of transformation. When balanced, this principle grants emotional intelligence, deep creativity, natural empathy, inner stability, receptive wisdom. But like all forces, imbalance distorts its expression. When feminine energy becomes excessive, boundaries dissolve. Emotion overwhelms reason. The individual becomes submerged in feeling, unable to act decisively. Sensitivity turns into fragility. Compassion becomes self-sacrifice without limits. This imbalance manifests as emotional overwhelm, fear of action, victim consciousness, dependency, loss of structure. Conversely, when feminine energy is suppressed or deficient, life becomes dry and mechanical. Intuition is ignored. Creativity withers. The individual loses connection to meaning and emotional depth. Logic dominates without soul. This imbalance produces emotional detachment, lack of empathy, creative stagnation, inner emptiness, disconnection from self. Hermetic wisdom teaches that the feminine is not meant to rule alone, nor to be dominated. Its role is to transform impulse into form, intention into reality. Without feminine energy, masculine action is blind. Without masculine energy, feminine creation remains unmanifested. They are not rivals. They are partners in creation. And it is only when these two principles meet within us that true power is born. The sacred union, the alchemical marriage within. When the Hermetic texts speak of creation, they are not referring only to the creation of objects, worlds, or physical forms. They are pointing towards something far more intimate, the creation of the awakened human being. This awakening occurs through what the alchemists call the sacred union, the marriage of the masculine and feminine principles within. In ancient alchemy, this union was symbolized as the wedding of the king and the queen, the sun and the moon, sulfur and mercury. This was never meant to describe an external relationship. It was a coded language for an inner transformation. The alchemical marriage represents the moment when action and intuition, will and receptivity, logic and imagination cease to oppose one another and begin to cooperate. Before this union, the human being is divided. One part wants to act but lacks clarity. Another part understands deeply but hesitates to move. One side pushes forward blindly. The other waits endlessly without direction. This internal conflict is the source of most human suffering. Hermetic wisdom teaches that enlightenment does not come from choosing one side over the other, but from integrating both into a single conscious force. When masculine and feminine energies are balanced, thought becomes aligned with feeling. Action arises from inner truth. Creativity gains structure. Discipline gains meaning. This is the birth of the inner magician, the being capable of conscious creation. In practical terms, this union means learning to listen before acting, and an actor without hesitation once clarity is achieved. It means honoring intuition without abandoning reason, and applying discipline without suppressing sensitivity. In psychological language, this is the integration of the conscious and subconscious minds. The subconscious, governed largely by feminine energy, generates images, desires, emotions, and symbols. The conscious mind, aligned with masculine energy, directs focus, intention, and execution. When these two minds are at odds, creation becomes chaotic. When they work together, reality reshapes itself naturally. This is why many spiritual traditions emphasize inner harmony before external mastery. Without internal balance, power becomes destructive. With balance, power becomes creative. The alchemical marriage also dissolves the illusion that fulfillment can be found externally. Many search for completion through relationships, recognition, or control over others. Hermeticism teaches that what we seek outside is a reflection of what remains unintegrated inside. The moment this union occurs within, the need to dominate, possess, or seek validation fades. Creation becomes an expression of inner fullness rather than compensation for inner lack. This is why the Hermetic initiate is described as whole, not perfect, not emotionless, but integrated, a being who contains both firmness and softness, direction and surrender, fire and water. This internal union generates a powerful magnetic field. The individual becomes naturally aligned with opportunities, synchronicities, and meaningful encounters. not through force, but through resonance. This is the hidden meaning behind the ancient phrase, "Know thyself, and you shall know the universe," because the universe itself is built upon the same union. Gender across the three planes, physical, mental, and spiritual. Hermetic philosophy teaches that the principle of gender is not confined to biology, psychology, or symbolism. It operates across all levels of existence, expressing itself differently on each plane of reality. These planes, physical, mental, and spiritual, are not separate worlds. They are layers of the same reality, vibrating at different degrees of subtlety. And on every one of them, masculine and feminine forces are at work. The physical plane. On the physical level, gender is the most visible. Here, masculine and feminine principles express themselves through polarity, reproduction, and form. In nature, creation requires an active impulse and a receptive matrix. Pollen and ovule, charge and field, expansion and containment. This principle governs biological reproduction, growth cycles, attraction and repulsion, structural stability. Even at the atomic level, creation occurs through polarity. Positive and negative charges interact to form stable matter. Without this balance, atoms could not exist, and the universe would collapse into chaos. Importantly, Hermeticism does not equate this with social roles or cultural definitions. Masculine and feminine energies exist within all beings, regardless of physical sex. The body expresses polarity, but consciousness contains both principles simultaneously. The mental plane. On the mental plane, gender becomes more subtle, yet more powerful. Masculine mental energy governs logic, analysis, direction, focus, decision. Feminine mental energy governs imagination, intuition, symbolic thinking, emotional resonance, creativity. Thought itself is born from their interaction. An idea arises intuitively, feminine reception. It is shaped into structure, masculine direction. It is nurtured internally, feminine gestation. It is expressed outwardly, masculine execution. When one dominates, mental imbalance follows. Pure logic without intuition becomes rigid and lifeless. Pure imagination without structure becomes scattered and ungrounded. Creative genius emerges only when intuition and intellect collaborate. This is why artists, scientists, and mystics alike speak of ideas arriving rather than being forced, and then requiring discipline to manifest. The spiritual plane. On the spiritual plane, the principle of gender reaches its highest expression. Here, masculine energy appears as divine will, cosmic order, and creative intelligence. Feminine energy appears as divine wisdom, universal consciousness, and the womb of existence. Ancient traditions encoded this truth in myth. Shiva and Shakti, Yin and Yang, Logos and Sophia, sun and moon. Creation itself emerges from their union. The spiritual seeker who favors only will becomes aggressive and disconnected. The seeker who favors only surrender becomes passive and lost. True awakening requires both intention and receptivity. Prayer without openness becomes empty repetition. Meditation without direction becomes stagnation. The initiate learns to command without force and surrender without weakness. This is the spiritual mastery hinted at in Hermetic texts. The principle of gender reveals that evolution does not occur through dominance, but through harmony, not through elimination of opposites, but through their integration. Understanding this law allows us to move consciously through life, creating rather than reacting, harmonizing rather than resisting. Imbalance, suffering, and the path back to harmony. Hermetic wisdom teaches that suffering is not punishment. It is imbalance made visible. When masculine and feminine energies fall out of harmony, the result of confusion, frustration, and internal conflict. Most psychological, emotional, and even spiritual struggles arise not from external forces, but from this inner misalignment, excess masculine energy. When masculine energy dominates unchecked, the individual becomes rigid. Action replaces reflection. Control replaces understanding. Power becomes more important than meaning. The mind seeks certainty at all costs and rejects anything that cannot be measured or commanded. This imbalance often manifests as emotional suppression, obsession with productivity, or dominance. inability to rest or receive, fear of vulnerability, authoritarian behavior. Such individuals may appear strong, decisive, and confident on the surface, yet internally they are disconnected from intuition and emotional truth. Life becomes a battlefield instead of a creative process. Over time, this rigidity leads to burnout, loneliness, and spiritual dryness. The soul suffocates beneath excessive structure, excess feminine energy. When feminine energy overwhelms without structure, the opposite occurs. Feeling replaces action. Sensitivity dissolves boundaries. Intuition becomes noise rather than guidance. The individual becomes absorbed in emotion without direction. This imbalance often appears as emotional instability, chronic indecision, dependency on others, fear of responsibility, loss of personal authority. Life feels overwhelming. The person absorbs the moods, expectations, and energies of others without filter. Instead of flowing with life, they are swept away by it. Creation becomes impossible because nothing is completed. Suppression and deficiency, more subtle and equally damaging, is a suppression of either principle. Many suppress feminine energy in the name of logic, dismissing emotion and intuition as weakness. Others suppress masculine energy, avoiding action and responsibility under the illusion of spiritual surrender. Both lead to fragmentation. Without masculine direction, intuition cannot manifest. Without feminine depth, action loses meaning. The path of correction. Hermeticism does not teach elimination of imbalance through force. It teaches conscious correction. Correction begins with observation. Where do you push when you should listen? Where do you wait when you should act? Balance is restored not by changing who you are, but by integrating what is missing. If action dominates, cultivate silence. If emotion dominates, cultivate discipline. Practices that restore harmony include meditation to strengthen receptivity and awareness, structured action aligned with inner truth, creative expression balanced by execution, reflection followed by commitment. The goal is not neutrality, but dynamic balance, a living harmony that adapts to circumstance. The Hermetic initiate learns to shift energies consciously, rather than being ruled by them unconsciously. This is inner mastery. And when inner mastery is achieved, suffering loses its grip, not because life becomes easy, but because life becomes intelligible. The alchemical union and the birth of the integrated being. Hermeticism teaches that the highest form of creation does not occur outwardly first. It occurs inwardly. When masculine and feminine energies are consciously united within the individual, a profound transformation takes place. This union is known in alchemy as the sacred marriage, the alchemical conjunction, or the hieros gamos. It is not a metaphor for romance, but a description of psychological and spiritual integration. The inner marriage. Within every human being exists a masculine principle that initiates, directs, penetrates, and decides. A feminine principle that receives, nurtures, transforms, and gives form. When these forces operate separately, the individual feels divided. When they oppose each other, inner conflict arises. But when they unite, something new is born, a third force. This third force is conscious creation. The masculine provides intention. The feminine provides embodiment. Together, they create reality, the birth of the integrated self. An integrated being no longer acts from compulsion or reaction. Action arises from clarity. Intuition is trusted but verified. Logic serves meaning rather than suppressing it. This individual acts decisively without aggression, feels deeply without losing boundaries, thinks clearly without losing empathy, creates without forcing, receives without passivity. They become internally sovereign. In Hermetic language, this is the birth of the philosopher's child, the awakened consciousness born from balanced opposites. Practical expression in daily life. This inner union transforms every aspect of life. In work, ideas arise intuitively feminine and are executed systematically masculine. In relationships, strength protects without dominating. Sensitivity connects without dependency. In spirituality, discipline grounds mystical experience. Surrender softens ambition. In creativity, vision flows freely, then crystallizes into form. Life stops feeling fragmented. Purpose becomes embodied rather than imagined. The magnetism of balance. One of the lesser-known consequences of this integration is magnetic coherence. Balanced individuals unconsciously attract opportunities aligned with their values, relationships based on respect, stability without stagnation, growth without chaos. This is not mysticism. It is energetic alignment. When inner forces are unified, the external world responds accordingly. As within, so without. Gender beyond biology. Hermeticism dissolves the modern confusion around gender by transcending it. Masculine and feminine are cosmic principles, not social roles. Every human being must master both to reach wholeness. To deny one is to remain incomplete. To integrate both is to awaken. The final teaching, the principle of gender, reveals that creation is not accidental. It is a result of union. Nothing meaningful is born without polarity. Nothing endures without balance. The universe itself exists because masculine and feminine forces remain eternally intertwined, expanding and receiving, projecting and shaping. When you align these forces within yourself, you stop seeking completion outside. You become whole, and in that wholeness, you become a conscious participant in creation itself.